also recognize the enduring presence of all First Nations, Métis, and Inuit peoples. Miigwech. So our first item on the agenda is a call to order. Sorry, second item on the agenda is declarations of possible conflict of interest. Does anybody have a conflict of interest to declare? Seeing and hearing none. Our third item is delegations. Oh, yes. Trustees online, could you please identify yourselves?
Yeah, Trustee Wong here.
Trustee Shan here.
Thank you.
Trustee Dawson here.
Thank you.
Hastings here.
Thank you. I see Trustee Rajkulasingham.
Trustee Rajkulasingham here.
Thank you. Oh, that last one's you. Our next item on the agenda is delegations, but are delegation delegates not here? Or are we no delegations? Okay. Okay, so we'll move on to item number 4, which is the opportunity for oral updates from co-chairs of community advisory committees, but Jean-Paul's not here. Okay, so can we, does anybody have a problem if we delay item number 4 and move on to item number 5? Oh, never mind. He's here. Where would we like him to sit? Yeah, Jean-Paul, please come up to a microphone. Okay, so we will proceed with item number 4, which is a report from the Special Education Advisory Committee. And there's a recommendation for the 2023-24 operating budget from our Special Education Advisory Committee. Whenever you're ready, Jean-Paul, go ahead.
Okay. Good afternoon, everyone. My name is Jean-Paul Ngana. I'm the chair of TDSB Special Education Advisory Committee. And thank you for the opportunity to, report on the recommendation made by SEAC from yesterday's meeting. We had a meeting in this very boardroom yesterday. And on the budget, as you know, and we also thank staff who have been working with us, to make sure that we are part of the budget planning process, including Craig Snyder, who came twice, for this session to, share with us some of the challenge that the board is facing with the deficit, and we also acknowledge that. And in the same time, we are really concerned, as the student population that we advise, the board on is the most vulnerable, segment of the student, population. And that's exactly, and we went, through the material that we were provided with, and we were really unable, to have, some specific recommendation for the board. And the only thing that we come up with was really what you see there. So in that, further questions and to really know exactly what we can base specific recommendation on. Because, discussing with senior staff, which, by the way, we thank for really to being there, Associate Director Luis Cirisco, sharing some further information with us, before yesterday's meeting. And although we went through all of this, the only thing came out again, further question. And one of the questions that we asked, because we were concerned, unknown consequences of some of these reductions on the service, that our, student population needs, because that they're facing daily challenges. We know that others, students do face challenge, but for students who need special education, program and services is really high. And that's how, we came out with this. And another thing that we really want, the board to consider is really to see, to look into, even if we don't know consequences yet about all this reduction, I see, and to really try to estimate what will really be, the proper standard, for example, ratio, for example, ratio in a special education teacher to a special education needs student, so that we don't go below that. That's really something that, we would like, if, with the tight, timeline that is now, even if we can kind of contemplate status quo for some aspect of special education, as we continue to have answer to some of these questions. And really see this, as we discuss on this, see this as not spending, but investment. Because, we want some of our, autistic students to be working out there like those students who do not have some of these challenges. And that is something that, I would suggest that, because in this case, we're not spending, money to have these children, example of autistic students, to be like their friends who do not have these challenges. But we're investing, and when we see them out there, that's the return on investment. That will be, strongly suggestion, and that is the motion. I don't want to read because everyone is reading what we do there. I'm just sharing all these contents. Thank you very much for listening.
Thank you. Do we have questions for Jean-Paul? Go ahead, Trustee Laskin.
Thank you very much, through you, Madam Chair. Thank you for this recommendation. I think this information is obviously important to SEAC, but also important to all trustees to clearly understand implications of decision-making. My one question, and I'm not sure who's the right person to answer it, is timing. Is the expectation that staff can produce this report prior to the 20th when the budget comes before us? That's my question through you, Madam Chair.
Thank you. And who should take that? Go ahead.
Thank you, and through you, Chair. Good afternoon. We've been partnering for a few months now, personally, and certainly the budget team led by Craig have been working alongside SEAC and talking about the challenges of the board budget. I think the heart of the statement in the motion from SEAC really is about describing what the changes are to service level for students. The information for SEAC has been expressed at a variety of meetings. And the accountability, I would suggest, through you, Chair, to Trustee Laskin, would be over the course of time in future meetings. At the heart of it is how will we be maintaining support for students and our legal obligations. We want to be identifying goals that we share with SEAC, and to be sharing the data that they have been asking for that are directly connected to services and supports. Part of the report that I provided the Budget Working Group cited past reports that we've been sharing through to the board. So one of them was, as an example, data on the number of students that we have receiving special education supports and services and generating IEPs. That number has been trending down, also because our enrollment as a board is trending down. Another report was about the reductions in budget that were proposed for central staffing. The report that I also shared with the Budget Working Group outlined the number of elementary and secondary special education resource teachers, which are a very, very small number compared to the number of our schools, and provided reassurance to the committee that it would be spread over our 500 schools and be seen as a very limited reduction, and that we would be making sure that service levels were not deteriorated, and that we would be supporting students in different ways. And lastly, the reduction of central staff, coordinators, and consultants really, we feel, is an enhanced support model. It's just different. We are wanting to have support closer to schools. So more directly, Trustee Laskin, I feel that SEAC has been provided clear direction and information about the reductions, and building shared understanding about our enrollment decreasing, and the number of students reported as students with special education needs is also reporting. And our commitment as staff is to be partnering all through next year and in the ongoing future to provide assurance that supports and services actually are very thoughtful, and that we're going to be using data to show impact of our actions for student achievement.
A follow-up. Thank you for that information, but that's not what this says. So this is before us today, asking for a detailed explanation of all planned cuts. So it's not saying we've received that detailed explanation, it's asking for it. So I guess my question is, your response implied that they have this information, but that's not what the recommendation says. So through you, Madam Chair, I'm just a bit confused.
If I may try again, through you, Chair. Yes, thank you. Thank you, Trustee Laskin. Through the Chair, I would therefore be thinking that the request be turned back to staff so that we're able to provide that detailed information to SEAC if they are feeling that the explanation is not as clear as they're wanting it to be, so that we are able to provide the assurance that those 3 levels of reductions.
Thank you, through you, Madam Chair. That makes more sense to me, and I'm sorry I wasn't clear about that at the beginning, because I assumed that this would be a staff report coming to SEAC and to trustees. So my question is, I would refer this to staff to bring back a report with a detailed explanation, as per the request of SEAC. My question on that is, and this maybe would be to the chair of SEAC, through you, Madam Chair, when you made this request at your meeting last night, was your expectation it would come before the board voted on the budget? Or is your expectation that it will be coming as regular updates through SEAC as the implementation of the reductions go forward? Through you, Madam Chair.
Thank you to Madam Chair. I think the expectation was to have this information before any decision is made on the budget, because the implication, we don't know what are the implications of this
Thank you.
reduction or cut.
Thank you for clarifying that. So then, Madam Chair, my question to staff is this report possible for the 20th?
Through you, Chair. Most certainly.
Thank you very much. So then, if it's appropriate, and I'm sorry I didn't write this down, I would just refer this to staff for a report to come back for the discussion, the budget discussion on June 20th. Thank you.
Okay, Denise, Ms. Joseph-Dowers, can you clarify, that needs a seconder, right? And we have, okay. Yeah, okay, well, while they're working, we'll take questions from other trustees. So, go ahead. Sorry.
Thank you, through the chair. My only question with this is Trustee Laskin is requesting that this be referred to staff for a report to come back, but is it the motion that's in front of us, or the recommendation that's in front of us from SEAC, is that the board provides SEAC with a detailed explanation? So my question is just whether this is coming to us or whether this is going to SEAC.
If I may.
Yes, go ahead.
Thank you very much, Madam Chair. My assumption was it would be going to SEAC, but it would be copied to all trustees, so we'd have the information in our budget process.
Okay, so it's not that it's coming back to a meeting for our approval or anything like that. That makes more sense to me. So can we just make sure that whatever the wording is, that's clear?
So referred to staff for the report to go back to
How about for
SEAC by
information
June
for
20th.
SEAC?
For the information for SEAC by June 20th or on June 20th.
To refer to
or
staff
before.
for information for SEAC before June 20th. Does that make sense? Thank you.
We have Trustee Dawson as well.
Sorry, I just put in the chat, Trustee Laskin actually asked all of my questions, so you can remove me from the list.
Okay. Thank you, and go past the chair.
Go ahead.
Thank you. Yeah, I would just add that I would want to thank Associate Director Srisco for her work with SEAC since coming to the board and sharing all the information. I think it's really highlighted. SEAC's had a lot of new members. The budget committee is very small. So in addition to our own learning curve and process as a board, there was a big learning curve there. And I think the discussion back and forth has highlighted how we want to work differently than in the past with SEAC, as opposed to just having their budget committee do their thing, being more proactive in recruiting the members to come talk with us. And their request now for data has informed some work for the fall to help their involvement in this. So I'm grateful to the members for coming together, in our own budget cycle, and how pressured that was to gather some people together at ad hoc and look at our numbers and give us feedback. I'm grateful to staff for all the time they've put in to coming to SEAC meetings and bring this information to them. So do we have an amended motion? Or have a motion? Okay. Oh. Thank you. Okay, so Trustee Laskin is moving and Trustee McLean is seconding that the matter be referred to staff for the information to be provided to SEAC on or before June 20th, 2023, and copied to the board. Any further questions on this? Trustee McLean. Okay. Seeing no questions, could we open the vote, please? That's my vote.
Trustee Lee is in favor.
Thank you.
Shan in favor.
Thank you. Okay. Oh, thank you. That carries. Thank you very much, Jean-Paul, for coming to speak with us today, and we'll see you soon.
Yeah, thank you.
Okay, so now we move on to item number 5, which is the feedback from public consultations.
Thank you, and through the chair, we're pleased to bring this report forward and just to provide a little bit more information. So as part of the budget process, information regarding the 2023-24 budget was presented by staff as we attended 4 ward forums representing 14 different wards in 2 budget town halls last week. In total, the sessions were attended by approximately 350 people. The presentation is attached as Appendix A, and just as a high level, it did outline the revenue, including highlights of the GSN for 23-24. It outlined our expenditures, including the fact that 87% of our expenditures represent salaries and benefits, and that we're looking at the total estimated expenditures, that the 3.3 billion, 81% of them are instructional expenditures, 13% building operations and maintenance, 2% transportation, 2% administration, and then 2% other. So really highlighting, how tight and how where most of the spending goes at TDSB. In addition, we outlined some of the budget challenges for 23-24, including statutory benefits, replacement costs, inflation greater than funding, and areas where we spent more than funded. We did outline the financial position of the board currently and the commitment that we made through the 3-year deficit recovery plan to get to $15.1 million deficit in 23-24. We also stressed how important the budget drivers are in developing the budget, and that the budget should not just be evaluated by the reductions made, but also the decisions to keep or not to reduce spending. And some of those examples were the special education supports, safety, supports for mental health and well-being. We also then reduced all of the options to balance and then answered any questions. So that was basically the format of the public consultations. In addition, There have been a number of delegations that have been made to FBEC over the last number of months, including the 10 that we had yesterday. So based on the questions and answers that we had in an Appendix B, you will see all of the questions and answers from the budget town halls that were asked and answered. We did summarize the feedback received into categories and again, also provided the list of the questions and answers. So the main categories were school-based staffing, and in particular, there were questions about vice principals and aquatic instructors, and a number of questions on the determination of the allocation on a school-by-school basis. There were questions about special education support staff, and again, those include the positions like EAs, special need assistants, and CYWs. And there were questions at the ward forms related to whether or not there were reductions, and then if there were any additional allocations. For mental health, well-being, and safety, it was stressed through the public consultation the importance of these supports, especially coming out of the pandemic. And there was particular mention, in addition to mental health, or as part of mental health, well-being, and safety, the needs for supports to reduce racism. There were a number of facility-related issues that were raised, including concerns about the amount of deferred maintenance at some of our schools, concerns about how we are dealing with overcrowding at some schools. In addition, there were questions about the closing of unused classrooms in schools and about how some students are not attending their neighborhood schools due to the programming options that are more readily available at other schools. There were also questions related to central staffing, and we heard really two different types of questions. Some of them related to the reduction in central staffing and how it would impact schools, and others asked if there were further reductions that are being considered. And finally, and I think in each of the areas, there were a lot of questions regarding or related to advocacy. Not only how do you advocate for yourself at TDSB for cuts or reductions that may impact the public directly, but also how to advocate for the TDSB provincially and beyond. So that's really a summary of the feedback that we received over the last few months, really, and the last week in particular. So thank you, and I'll open it up to discussion.
First, we have Trustee Laskin.
Thank you very much, Madam Chair. I am planning to move business arising, but before I do that, I really like to thank staff for the summary. I think it's really helpful. I did listen in at the 1 o'clock session, and I obviously had a joint ward forum with my colleagues, but it is really important to hear the issues that resonated with the public, and really appreciated that. On the advocacy piece, I do think in this budget cycle, I'm proud that the ministry has responded to advocacy in a couple of ways. One was through the Caring and Safe Schools funding, and another through the SIP funding. So I'm very pleased about that. And I just wanted to say out loud, for the benefit of who's ever listening, is that in fact at OPSP, at the Board of Directors meeting just this past weekend, the Board of Directors moved a motion about advocacy that the president of OPSPA responded to all trustees about today. And the good news there is that the motion actually read that the Ontario Public School Boards Association advocate to the Ministry of Education to address the deficits in funding that support the delivery of programs affecting student success and well-being. And this was a motion from trustees from across the province. And President of OPSPA has already reached out to the minister for a face-to-face meeting. So I think that's really important. Now to my business arising. So it was clear, and it has been clear through deputations, that a lot of community members, students, and staff alike are we're concerned about the potential reductions to pool operations as a result of a misunderstanding through a vote at FBEC. And I think the understanding is if there was any program changes, that would fall to our Program and School Services Committee to have a full discussion. So I did move a motion, and when asking staff what would it take to put back full swim programming in schools with pools, and staff responded in one of their reports that it would be 6 FTEs. So I did move a motion that I am going to move as business arising. And it will come as no surprise because I've moved this once already and it was deferred to this meeting. So it has not changed. And the board did decide that consideration be deferred to this meeting. So whereas following the vote on reducing aquatics instructors, staff realized that with 80 aquatics instructors, the swimming programs for students would indeed be reduced at 8 elementary and 12 secondary schools. And whereas the board did not intend to confirm this implementation of a reduction to swim programming, therefore be it resolved that the director be asked to pause the current program reduction implementation and add back a complement of aquatic instructors to ensure full programming for students in all schools with pools for 2023-2024. And as per the staff report, this would mean the addition of 6 FTE aquatics instructors. So I'd like to move that now, Madam Chair. And
Madam Chair, may I interrupt? Before we get to business arising, we should do a vote on receipt of the report and then get to the business arising.
No problem, Madam Chair. I'll stand down.
Okay. Thank you. Okay. Do we have any more questions?
Oh, okay.
Report? Okay, I just want to make sure everybody's had their hand up for discussion. Who wants to discuss? I do have one question.
Go ahead.
Okay. Thanks. I had emailed, because there's a couple of questions in the, that happened through the town halls that I also got from parents. And one of them was around central positions and how many do we have, could these be cut? I don't agree necessarily with that approach because I know we have really important roles that are being led. A lot of the central roles we have means that our principals don't have to do that work themselves, that they're leading equity and professional development initiatives. Staff have an answer in here for how many roles are central, and it's listed as 19% of our salaries. But I'm wondering if there's a further breakdown of how much of that is directly education related, because it also lists facilities administration, other central, and how much of those positions are actually education related as opposed to like working in human resources or facilities.
Through the chair, just looking at numbers and I can turn to Executive Officer Snyder to confirm possibly a percentage, but we're looking at about 300 staff that support centrally, whether it's coordinators, consultants, or the administration related to those positions in PSSP that support schools.
Sorry, through the chair, what was the question one more time? Just so that I have my spreadsheet up.
I'm just wondering, staff provided a number that was said 19% of our salaries and benefits go to our facilities administration and other central staff. The question that I've gotten is more specific to education-based staff who are central, not in front of students, and what breakdown would be, as the associate director said, program coordinators or consultants or centrally assigned positions that are specifically education related. Obviously, we aren't going to take our facility staff and put them in classrooms.
And I believe that Associate Director said around 300, and that's what I have as well.
Okay, thank you. And these would be, so as you said, these would be like program coordinators like and consultants like for special education, outdoor ed, specific programs like that, education partnerships.
Yes, and as well as the admin that support those positions. So about 260 of those positions would be educators specifically.
Okay, thank you very much. Okay, go ahead.
Thank you. Through the chair, just a quick comment on the public consultation. This, of course, being my first sort of time through the process. I think that sort of collectively, I would hope that as we go through this term, that we'd be able to build on some of the comments that we're getting from parents, because just hearing the echo and from my own parents and the town hall that I did, wanting to know how they can better participate, better through advocacy, and how we can help and organize that process centrally in a way that provides folks for great opportunity for participation. And I say this knowing two things. First of all, some of the criticism will come our way as an institution because that's what happens. And I think that's part of the democratic process of being an open institution that prides itself on self-improvement. And I think that is a significant thing. But then also, it gives us a greater voice and allows, the statements and questions that we send out to the Minister of Education to be heard more clearly. Because we're about to make some choices that will help us balance the budget, but we're still seeing a reduction over time in the resources invested in the classroom. And we are not going to be able to counter that without shifting public perception about what's happening. And so as much as this process is nearing its conclusion and there isn't significant amount of things that we can do from now until then to change the outcome, I would like us to take some time to consider the type of activities and things that we can do collectively in the hundreds and hundreds of schools that we have in order to raise the level of awareness about that erosion of funding that is happening over time. And with that, I'll finish off my thoughts. Just would like us to be able to take this up in the fall in order to be able to do the work that we would need to, so that next year we have greater force in some of the demands that we're making. Thank you.
Okay, thank you. I don't see any further questions, so Trustee McLean, you wanted to move?
Yeah, happy to move receipt of the report.
Receipt of the report. DeVitis, second.
Trustee Lee also has business rights.
Oh, okay. Okay. Oh. Are we? apparently we're rebooting.
Do you want us to just vote by hand, Madam Chair?
Should we just vote by hand? Yeah, we can just vote by hand. Okay, just show of hands, all in favor of receipt of the public feedback? All in the room, online? I think I heard,
Shan in favor.
thank you,
Wong in favor.
thank you,
Lee's in favor.
thank you. Oh, there it is. We have trustee Patel up there. Yeah, okay, I think that's everyone. Okay, thank you. Oh. Yeah. Go ahead. I believe that there are, is there?
Thank you, and I believe I had just over a minute left, but I had moved a business arising motion, Madam Chair, to ask staff to put back 6 FTE aquatics instructors. That's been seconded by Trustee McLean. And at this point, Madam Chair, I'd just like to hear from staff and obviously my other colleagues. Thank you.
Thank you, and through the chair. So given this motion, we would be adding back the 6 aquatic instructors at a cost of $400,000. That would bring us up to the 15.3 million if all of the other options to balance were approved, which is 200,000 more than the commitment that we have through our budget deficit recovery program. That being said, a number of the amounts that we have put in our estimates, and we believe that there is some flexibility to be able to find that $200,000, whether it's through an increase in the SIP claims possibly that we are receiving, or the one-time funding that is going to be analyzed and used. And so staff would be in a better position to bring back through even the revised estimates once we have all of the information, actual information in the fall. But that we do believe that we would be able to balance with this additional funding.
Do we have any questions from trustees? Trustee McLean?
Thank you, and through the chair, I would just like to share that I'm in support. I think that these pools are tremendous assets in the buildings in which are fortunate enough to have them. A lot of these buildings, when they were designed, were on small footprints, and that the physical activity of the students was anticipated to take place in the pools because they didn't have tracks and large facilities for a great deal of physical education. I think we heard from a number of the delegates, young and old alike, about the value of the programming, the value of the life-saving skills that is paramount for, I think, everyone in our society, and I certainly believe that everyone should look at acquiring those skills. But I think it's great that when we have an opportunity to make the introduction of those skills and to do it in the course of our programming, I think it's a tremendous asset for those. So I will be supportive. Thank you, Madam Chair.
Thank you. Next, we have Trustee Lee.
Through you, Madam Chair, I just want to say I think directionally, I think we should support this just because I know this change was made with without too much consultation being given to the community. But I just want to be very clear that we are here today because the community that this is affecting have a very strong voice in advocacy. And I also just do want to put it on the record that the claim that these schools have a pool and a pool program because they do not have adequate track and field facilities or enough space to run programming, I think that is not true because I have looked into a good number of schools that have a swim program. These schools have very good amenities that many other schools across the city that doesn't have a swimming programs do not have. So I just want to be very clear that I think when we're putting these costs back or these budgets back, we're doing it because, in my opinion, we shouldn't be making program decisions in the the way that we're doing it. So I think I hear the advocacy, I hear the impact, but I don't agree that these programs, if we line it up across all the priorities that the TDSB have, should take precedence over other things and many other things that we're not funding. For example, special education and many, many other. And I also just want to say that the TDSB in its history has made many changes that are similar in impact to students. But I think those impacted students, be it, the fact that many of them are immigrants or their parents may not have the communication skill or the understanding of the system to advocate as loudly. I think similar impacts have been made to those students, and they weren't able to get it back. So I guess my question to staff is, what is the long-term goal of these programs, given that the facilities are inequitably distributed? What is the review process and the review mechanism that we have for us to go into a committee like the PSSC and really determine how a program like this should be operated and where it is actually needed? For example, where are those schools that actually do not have any other facilities but a pool? And where are those schools that have all the facilities and the pool is only something that's over and above? Thank you.
I think we'll direct that to Associate Director Salmon.
Thank you, and through the chair, and thank you for the question. I think part of what we do need to do is look at our pools with a full review that staff is more than willing to provide, so that we can answer some of the questions that Trustee Lee has outlined. And I think overall, this certainly becomes part of the notion of our programs and our facilities, and what programs and facilities the myriad of schools across our system have, and how are we better able to utilize them, with the goal that at the end of the day, we want to make sure that where there is an actual facility available, we want to make sure that all of our students, staff, and community have access where appropriate. Thank you.
Thank you. Through Madam Chair, I just want Associate Director Salmon to clarify for me a little bit more. What does that mean from a program review process? What is the next step, or is there anything being planned?
So through the chair, part of what we will be doing is looking to identifying what the key parameters are around the program review and what may be entailed. We have not made that determination at this time, but as we move into the fall and initiate a review, we need to establish first what the parameters are in order to be able to provide consistent and recommendations to the board in order to move forward.
Thank you. And through Madam Chair, is this something that staff is already doing and will have a timeline, or does it take a board motion to move forward? I just would like to get a staff commitment on this one. Thank you.
Thank you for that question. And through the chair, I think based on the conversations that we've been a part of at this board over the last 2 months, I think staff is more than committed to doing that particular review in the fall in order to bring back to trustees going forward.
All right, thank you, through Madam Chair. I really appreciate Associate Director Salmon, your plan. Hopefully, next budget cycle we can have a more holistic conversation on this particular matter. Thank you.
Thank you. Next, we have Trustee Shan.
Thank you, Madam Chair. I will be supporting the motion for two reasons. One, that in fact, when this conversation was had, this reduction was not supposed to have programmatic impact, and it ended up having programmatic impact, and so there was that gap in understanding when this decision was made. So, but I still voted against the cuts at that time. I'll still continue to vote against it. The other reason is also I have consistently voted against all cuts, so I'm not prioritizing this particular situation just because there was a clear form of advocacy, and the advocacy came with certain amount of privilege as well, and so my decision is not based on that. My decision is that I have consistently voted against any cuts, including cuts to aquatic programs in the last time. Now, having said that, I would like to ask the staff that the review that is happening around this, if that's going to be happening in the fall, would that be also including some conversation around additional use of these facilities by students and community that is outside the school, the immediate quote-unquote school community?
Associate Director Salmon, can you take that one, please?
Thank you, and through the chair, as outlined, part of what we need to do is actually establish what are the parameters of the review such that we are able to come back to trustees in a timely fashion. I think that may be one of the possibilities with a myriad of some other key components around what are those parameters. So we have not yet at this point in time determined the specific parameters, and we certainly welcome any suggestions from trustees, but it will be something that will be undertaken by staff in the fall. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you, Associate Director Salmon. Through you, Madam Chair. I just wanted to maybe some of my comments additionally might be helpful. I'm deeply concerned about access to swimming programs in areas, particularly say north of 401. And one of the things is that if swimming is so important, it's something that has to be ingrained into the things that we support as a school board, then we might also look into some of the programs that we could offer by collaborating with Pan Am Center in Scarborough, for example, and other things, because the facilities may not have it, but there are other facilities around the schools that have these spaces that we as an organization, as an institution, as an educational institution, if we believe swimming is a critical part of the offering that we need to offer, that we find ways to extend, but also find ways to collaborate with other community organizations to open these spaces up in the weekend with additional support from the community, from not-for-profit sector, from other levels of government to increase it. Because if you just take I don't know if it's a satellite image or something and look at it, I'm sure there's privacy issues, but you could see that, which areas of the city have swimming pools in their own homes, which areas don't have swimming pools in their homes. Like if you take Scarborough, for example, the south part of Scarborough, below Lawrence, have most number of houses with swimming pools, whereas which go higher up in Scarborough, you would see less of it. And it is also something that then access to cottages, access to recreational spaces in the summer to have these programs and so on. If it is something that we are so passionate about that we want to offer, I am not supportive of cutting the programs in places that have the infrastructure. In fact, it's great that these infrastructures exist in these schools and we should continue to use them to the fullest, but we should also be looking at ways in which equitable amount of investment is made to either find more partnerships in other areas to offer this to students that don't have the opportunities and the classes that their parents have to send them to. Some of the parents do send them to these classes, but they forego their vacation for a year, or they forego a lot of things that they could be doing in order to send their kids to swimming classes and so on. So it's important to recognize the context of it. But at the end of the day, these are important infrastructures that we have, and we need to continue to use them. We need to continue to provide the opportunities to the students that have had this opportunity for the past as well. Thank you.
Thank you. Next, we have Trustee Patel.
Thank you, Madam Chair. And as Trustee Shan said very well, like I'm against any program cuts. And you have seen in the past, I have voted against any program cuts. But again, we deal with budget, and we are dealing with budget. And here is my concern about this particular program. Did staff find out the additional dollars we are looking for?
Thank you, and through the chair, just clarifying that in order to maintain the existing programming, we would need to add 6 FTE back at a cost of $400,000, which is what's being proposed in this business arising.
Through you, Madam Chair, and I see that, but did staff find out how can we pay that $400,000? How can we, if we have to bring the threshold to below 1.5, right, if I'm not wrong? And I'm not in front of the computer and the agenda item, but that's what I recall. Did we able to find out that money, or are we funding from POD?
Sorry, and through the chair, I misunderstood the question. So we did talk about the fact that we were down at 14.9, so that 200 of the 400,000 would be able to be added, and we would still be compliant with our deficit recovery plan. The other 2,000, because a number of the options to balance are estimates, that, for example, if we were to receive additional SIP funding over the $5 million, that we would be able to use that additional funding to offset these costs.
Thank you, Associate Director. So to you, Madam Chair, we do have hopes to get that $200,000 that we are looking for. Can I safely say that?
Yes.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Those are my questions for now. Thank you.
Thank you. And we're back to Trustee Laskin.
Thank you very much. I think through Trustee Shan brought up some very important points, and I just want to draw our attention to timing. It's important, through you, Madam Chair, that the report that comes to board also involves the Toronto Lands Corporation, because our city pool agreement is up in August of 2024. And I think some of the initiatives that are being spoken about today, it would be good that TLC understands what the board would like to do, an expansion of opportunity for swimming program, prior to getting into the heart of that renegotiation with the city. So I just wanted to say that out loud. So I know staff are aware of that, but perhaps the public and my colleagues weren't aware about that agreement, which first was established, back in 2007, I think, and was extended in 2011 and 2017. It's now up for its final renewal. So now it will be revised. And I know TLC it's on their radar. So I'm just making that a very public point.
Thank you for that. I don't see any further questions. So could we call the vote? So we have the motion moved by Trustee Laskin and Trustee McLean.
Favor.
Trustee Patel in favor.
Trustee Lee?
Trustee Lee's in favor.
Thank you. Thank you, everyone. That carries. So, sorry, next on the list, we had Trustee Lee, and then we'll go to, and then Trustee McLean and Trustee Earhart on our list, master list.
Thank you, through you, Madam Chair. And I just, I should have sent an email to our committee members earlier, but I just did it now. So I apologize for the delayed communication of this motion for business arising. And even when I did it, I realized I probably missed the chair and the chair of the committee and also the chairs of the board. So I'm just resending that email now. I just so team, I'm moving looking to move a motion from business rising just from the once again consultations that I did with my community, and I think everybody understands that there are difficult decisions that has to be made, and everyone understands that all the things that we're doing now, we can't afford to do it the same way in the future just because of our budget situation. There are two main things that came out of that conversation I had with the community that I represent. The first one is a question to say, what is the reason why we are spending a net $6.7 million in deficit every year to support continuing education? The comment from our parents are that we understand that we want to help the adults, but our main priority is to help the children, is to educate the children. And given we're cutting programs for kids, including, the swimming pool programs, what is the reason why we're subsidizing $6.7 million for continuing education? Now, I understand that our staff members are proposing a reduction in that deficit of around $600,000, but that still leaves a $6 million deficit that we are committing to for continuing education. So that was the first question. And the second comment that was mentioned to me by the parents is that the one-to-one device deployment, it's something that is important for the future of our children because they're going to be using more devices in the future, not less. So to pull that program back, we will actually negatively impact our kids in the long run, and nobody actually wants to see that, and everyone understood why we needed to spend money on it. But the question was, is it a all or nothing option, right? For example, in our options to balance budget, there was a $9 million price tag put beside it. And I think the total cost is 11 million. I think 9 million will constitute a very, very large cut. So the question is it an all or nothing option, or are there other options somewhere in the middle of cutting 9 million or not cutting 9 million, where we can where we can land, where we give devices to students that absolutely need them, but also have other students bring their own, where there are also options that threw out to say, hey, what if we charged a very nominal fee instead of saying 3 devices for everybody? What if the TDSB charged $20 a year and see where that is, right? So it's heavily subsidized. So those are all the questions that are asked of me. I don't have an answer to them. And therefore, before we make that really important budget decision, I think it'll be very helpful for us to have a viewpoint from staff, right? And therefore, that's why I'm moving this motion as business arising to ask for the director to provide before the June 20th FBEC meeting a breakdown of what that $6.7 million net deficit for continuing education actually means, and give us a plan to reduce that overall deficit and see if we can reverse the 35 full-time employee that we made to special education staff because the one-time pandemic funding was cut. Right, so I think that's to me that is an important part of prioritization that we have to make. And the second one is really to ask staff to let us know are there other ways to reduce the cost of our student device programs without a full elimination? So, I once again looking for a seconder if the committee will indulge me, and happy to answer any questions. Thank you.
Just going to check online.
I can second that,
Okay.
Trustee Lee.
Okay, go ahead. Thank you.
Thank you very much.
Do we have any questions for the trustee or staff? So Trustee Laskin, Trustee Earhart? Oh, sorry. Sorry. You already have a list. Look at you. Sorry. So Trustee DeVitis, Trustee Laskin, Trustee Earhart.
So, Trustee Lee, in regards to the second bullet in particular, I have a deep interest in that because I did get very similar feedback in terms of parents being worried about the program being reduced or done away with, particularly because this would affect different families differently. Not everybody has a computer at home, not everybody has the internet at home. And depending on your level of income in the home, that can affect the impact to learning. Heard from a couple of students from a high school of mine that were making a deputation yesterday. They don't often have textbooks to share in the school. So I guess my question to you is, my question would be around equity and an equity lens. How would we figure out a fair distribution method? Have you thought about that? Is there something that we can start taking a look at, whether it's now or later in the fall, around how it is that we ensure that we're efficient or maybe more efficient with the program without throwing away the entire program, as to say the baby with the bathwater, right? So have you thought about that at all in terms of what may be a good way of us being fair about how we use the resources?
Madam Chair, was that question for me or staff? Sorry.
Trustee Lee, that was for you.
Okay. Thank you, Trustee DeVitis. I appreciate your question, and that's exactly the feedback that I heard from my community as well. And I'm going to be fully transparent. I think our staff are the experts in how to operationalize this, but directionally, I think you are absolutely on the same track that I am, where it is a big budget item. We need to, we owe it to our community to be as efficient and effective with it as possible, using an equity lens to give the devices to the students who need it. Unfortunately, I am not the expert, and this is why I think I'm hoping that the director and our expert staff team can report back on some options.
Fair enough, and I'd definitely be supporting that part. The first bullet I have some more issues with because, I'm not sure that I would be able to support doing away with the program without actually sitting down with folks and giving them an opportunity to respond. And at this stage in the process, I'm not sure we'll be able to have that conversation with them, even if we get a report back from staff. That being said, I was happy to second your motion because I think these are conversations that are worth having. But thank you for putting this forward today.
Thank you, Trustee DeVitis. Not sure if you wanted a response from me.
More of a comment, just to let you know what I thought about it. Thank you.
Thank you.
Trustee Laskin?
Thank you very much. Through you, Madam Chair. I look forward to the breakdown of the continuing education budget, but I'm not sure I understand the second point. My understanding of the $9 million, my understanding is the one-to-one devices, the money has been allocated for this year so that students in 2023, 2024 get the one-to-one devices in grade 5 and grade 9. The vote on the 9 million is deferred, so it's not included in the budget plan for the year 2024, 2025, because it was my understanding that staff were going to review the distribution of the one-to-one, because I know there have been some issues raised. So I guess my point is I'm not sure that the second bullet is needed now for a report to June 20th. And I think that's a lot of work for staff to do. Like, I don't think you would get a good report in a few days because of the work that would be involved in that. So I see the first point, why that's needed for June 20th, but I don't see, I understand your second point, but I don't think that that is needed for June 20th. I think that is a very worthwhile discussion that staff will have over the course of the fall to be ready for that conversation about whether or not we continue to defer the 9 million or we actually vote for 9 million to be added in 2024-25's operational budget for distribution for kids in 2024. So I'm wondering, with consideration, either I'll ask to vote ad seriatim, or anyway. And then the other point in the first point, I would be more comfortable if that was split. I would like an itemized breakdown of the 6.7 million net, but I'm not sure I'm supporting plans to use that to reverse the 35 FTE reduction to special education staff. I'm not sure which special education staff you're referring to, and I just like them split for consideration again, so I can be really clear when I get the information versus obligating myself to a vote of support. So those were my concerns. And again, with apologies, having just seen it now, those are just immediate reactions. I haven't really had time to think about it. But I understand the intent to understand the breakdown and see if that is appropriate continuation of spending. But I'm not quite sure of attaching the two together. That's not really my comfort level at the moment.
I'm going to start. Trustee Lee, do you know which special education staff? Do you have that list? And then the director would like to comment.
Yeah, thank you. Through you, Madam Chair. First of all, I am happy to break the second part of the first bullet point out into its own bullet point, if Trustee Ditavides is okay as well. The FTE reduction to special education staff is referring to the ones that we have voted and passed on the in-classroom teacher and staff member budget section. Sorry, I forgot the exact numbers, but a number of months ago, we did have a conversation about this, and there were 35 FTEs that were reduced. And once again, this is not committing the committee to hiring them back. I would just like to have a opinion from the director and staff members to let us know whether or not we need to hire them back, or is there a portion, or if there's any way of doing this. I think we are asking a question from the director. I don't think we are committing the committee to any answers or plans. But I would just, I would be very sad if we passed a motion without knowing these important details. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Through the chair. Thank you, Chair and Trustee, for raising these important points. These two budget lines have been part of our ongoing conversation with regards to the reductions and the implications both on those students and community members who may access continuing education, as well as the importance of the one-to-one device program for some of our students. Firstly, I would like to address the point about outlining options to maintain the program. Staff have explained that this was our intention to do the study next year and to bring back options to the board. Realistically, I don't think we could present you with our best work and our best thinking within such a brief period of time. but please do know that this was part of the commitment that staff made when we proposed reducing the allocation for not for the upcoming school year, but for potentially the following school year, 24-25. Secondly, we have been in discussions about the deficit in continuing education. Some board members may remember a time when continuing education generated money for the board and was a revenue generator. We are committed to doing a study to understand how we can get back to that point within the delivery of our continuing education programs. We probably could provide a high-level overview of the $6.7 million deficit and certainly explain to you some of the interim strategies that we have discussed in order to reduce the deficit. But again, a broader long-term view towards returning continuing education to a revenue-generating service will take staff a bit more time and study to provide accurate information on which you could base your decisions.
Next, we have Trustee Earhart.
Thanks very much. Can you hear me? I'm still practicing for committee to sit and ask questions. Is it not on?
I think.
Is that better? Yeah, that's much better. Okay. Thanks very much. Thanks, Trustee Lee. Through the chair, I wanted to just ask about what is within continuing education, just as a background. So I just looked online. It's Learn for Life. What's on the website is Learn for Life, Adult General Interest Programming, International Languages, African Heritage Programs, Credit Programs, Adult ESL, Adult High Schools, Teach English as a Second Language, and Adult International Programs. So I just want to know if credit programs for 18 to 21-year-olds are included within this categorization. Thank you.
Mr. Snyder?
Sorry, there's adult continuing education, day schools is part of the programs of offer. There's night school and summer school for credit. There's elementary international languages program. There's non-credit adult ESL. And there's within the content department, they have elementary and secondary literacy and numeracy programs. And then, of course, they're doing the tutoring now, responsible for coordinating the tutoring programs.
Okay, thanks very much. While I don't sit on the committee, I would just encourage the committee to consider that it's particularly in the context of a pandemic, this is an area that I firmly believe is an important service that we're offering. I would hesitate as a new board member to digest a breakdown of costs and deficit without better understanding the programs, who the programs are, who is accessing these programs, and what the impacts would be. There is one adult learning center within the ward I represent, and I can say from the requests that I receive around access to continuing education that there are significant barriers for access, particularly for youth who were directly impacted during the pandemic in terms of completing their education. It's something that I would want to make sure that we are aware of why we have these services in our communities and who they are benefiting before making any consideration of further deficit reduction beyond what was already proposed by staff in terms of adult general interest programming, which was, I believe, in our proposals to move that to a revenue neutral series of offerings. Those are non-credit programs that do not contribute to youth's and adult, but youth's success in terms of their academic success. Thanks very much.
Thank you. And I will pass the chair.
Go ahead, please.
So thanks for this. I think some of my questions have been asked. I just wanted to understand. I fully support getting a breakdown and a report before the 20th. That would, I think, help everyone's understanding. My understanding is that the 6.7 million, reversing the 6.7 million in deficit in continuing education was to go towards balancing the budget, as opposed to being money we could use elsewhere. If staff could clarify that for me. And Trustee Lee, I just wanted to ask you, are you hard on the number of 35? Are you looking for staff to bring back what we could bring back? What kind of model we could look at and how many people we could bring back in what roles?
Thank you. Through you, Mr. Chair, to Madam Chair's question, if I may answer that directed towards me, I assume. I don't think I am, in certain words, hard or committed to any of the numbers that are on here. I am certain. I am only looking for an opinion from staff, just to provide me with a bit more context on, what is within that 6.7 million, because right now I don't think I have a good understanding. And also, is there a way to move the money around if the committee decide that, there are other priorities to bring back some of the 35 FTEs that we reduced. And I fully, once again, support and am aligned to Trustee Laskin's point of breaking that special education point out to a separate bullet point. In fact, I will ask that Ms. Joseph Dowers, if Trustee DeVitis is not, violently opposing, we do that now on page so that people don't get confused. Chair Arts, I hope that answers your question.
Yes, and I can wait for staff to break it down further in a report. I think my understanding, like Trustee Laskin's, that on the student device piece was that we were pausing as opposed to canceling, that we weren't going to include it in this budget as numbers so that we could say to the ministry, we have a balanced budget. But we weren't canceling it altogether, and we would be looking at, in the fall, how do we bring that back, or how do we do a later purchase so those 2024, 25 students still get devices. But I think, considering that this is on the floor, that it might be good to include more of those details in the in a report that outlines what would go forward next steps. Okay. Yeah, could you clarify, please?
Sure. Thank you. And through the chair, that was the intention, and we can clarify that in writing, that, again, this was a pause to the one-to-one device deployment to allow staff starting in the fall to be able to review the best way to ensure that we are providing the devices to support equity across the board, to know how many devices we have in our schools and how we can best support students. And if there's some model of bring your own device, that would be appropriate. So we do need some time to review that. That was always the intention. And that for the 24-25 budget, we could bring back either 9 million if that was required in order to continue it, or less than 9 million if that was what was determined. Again, it would pause it and it would delay the distribution by probably about a month, but that the intention would still be that the program would not be significantly interrupted. This would just pause and allow staff to do that work, to be able to exactly do what you're suggesting. And then the only other part that I will say is with regards to the 6.7 million, we can absolutely bring back the makeup of that deficit. When we looked at the $6.7 million deficit for 23-24, there was consideration at that time as to, is there anything that we could do in order to reduce that number without significantly impacting program, without having a fulsome review? And included in our options to balance is about 300,000, where we would look at class sizes and that type of thing. But the additional amount, without actually closing programs, especially in our adult day school or international languages, we wouldn't have that opportunity to make any of those reductions next year, again, without doing a fulsome review. So that was the intention, was yes, we do believe, as the director said, that we need to look at getting back to a position where we are at least breaking even in continuing education, but that it would need some time to be able to implement it appropriately and equitably.
Next, we have Trustee McLean.
Thank you, and through the chair. Yeah, I get, the director answered a lot of the questions that I had. And I think there's value in getting the report and making the distinction. I too have an adult education center. And I'm really excited about that which happens in that building and for those students. But I do recognize a difference between credit courses and general interest courses. And I would like that broken down and established, and I'm very interested in learning what can be done in the future to make it revenue neutral. Or I guess my question becomes, like initially, have we in any of the previous staffing models that we've approved, have we already approved the staffing for these positions?
Thank you, and through you, our staffing has been rolled out.
So if I'm understanding correctly, if we get a report back that we get really excited about for June 20th about potential areas to save, it would have to be in future years, because those savings we've already committed to the teachers, the educators that in 23, 24 would be providing the service. So any savings would be for the 24, 25 year. Is that correct?
Thank you, and through you, thank you for the question, Trustee McLean. We would likely have some capability for semester 2. In our work with Stacy and Craig, and understanding that $6.7 million is a very significant deficit for continuing education, what we realize that it is very complex. Part of this is salary discrepancy, other elements of we wanting to make sure that we're running our classes to the highest cap possible. Elements are funding other areas. So in order for us to be making very thoughtful changes that uphold collective agreements, that maintain important programs for our adult students, and for children who are wanting to learn other languages, where we have an obligation to be providing those programs for 20 students who want to learn another language. We open a class. We really need the time to do a thoughtful review, and it is staff's commitment to this board and understanding the importance of getting to a balanced budget, not just a compliant budget, that we will be providing you options that reduce that $6.7 million as low as we possibly can to be coming to balance or to the previous experience of running excessive or excessed amounts. But for September 23, we really did not feel that we were able to make additional reductions beyond the $600K. So, but for the semester 2 staffing, we can take a look at that.
Okay, thank you. Yeah, I'm very interested in learning the breakdown and, really interested when we get the fulsome report about making some choices about, in challenging times, who we choose to, what programming we choose to support. So I think that's a very important discussion, and I thank the mover and the seconder for pointing us in that direction and making us aware. Thank you.
Okay, thank you. Next we have Trustee Shan.
Thank you, Madam Chair. I have, so in terms of the continuing education question, and I thought Trustee Lee, when he spoke about it, mentioned that it is serving adults. I wanted to kind of know, when we get the itemized breakdown, would it be possible through you, Madam Chair, for the staff to itemize it for the different things like, international languages and African heritage programs, particularly support elementary students, and then the night schools and some of the summer school catered to high school, a lot of high school students as well, who are non-adult students as well. So I want to make sure that this particular, do we know if those things are not, is the 6.7 deficit that comes through this program, do we know which aspect of the continuing education contributes to that and which one is revenue generating?
Through the chair, yes, we do. The major contributors to the deficit are adult credit, Con Ed day schools, night school and summer credit, and elementary international languages and African heritage.
Sorry, so all of them contribute to the deficit, you mean? Sorry, to you, Madam Chair. I almost heard all of the names again.
Yes. Yes, that's what I heard.
Okay, so there is not, what aspect of the continuing education right now generates revenue? Is there any aspects of the different things that we do through continuing ed that generates revenue, net revenue?
Through the chair, at this time, we do have some components that do break even, but there are not any that generate revenue. And included in, just to clarify, included in the 6.7, the $600,000 for general interest courses is not included here, because that has been already provided as a deficit recovery or an option to balance the budget.
Okay, thank you. Thank you, staff. Through you, Madam Chair, that means the $6.7 million, that deficit, a lot of it is actually to support elementary and secondary students in our system who are taking summer school, night school, international languages, African heritage programs. Am I right in assuming that, Madam Chair? Through you.
Through the chair, that's correct.
Thank you very much. And yeah, and when we do get the itemized thing, would it be possible for the staff to bring it by those different programs? And just to understand, we used to have funding by the province for the international languages and heritage programs. Do we not get those fundings anymore, or is that funding not enough to sufficiently cater to the programs that we have?
Through the chair, we do still receive funding, but it is not enough to support the program that we have in place.
Thank you, Madam Chair. So going back to my previous question then, when we do get the breakdown, would we be able to get a breakdown? For example, this is what the province gives us for continuing education as it relates to international languages and African heritage programs, and this is what we spend. Would it be itemized at that level by each of the different components of continuing education? Is that something that's possible before the budget deliberations in the next meeting?
Through the chair, yes, it is.
Awesome. Thank you very much. And Madam Chair, my last question is that this motion, if it passes, For example, it is not, this might be a question for Trustee Lee as well. It is not directing the staff to do this. It's more of a question to gain more information and staff opinion information to make a decision, right? This doesn't necessarily say the program has to be discontinued and reallocated. It's to more to understand the financial situation of the continuing education. Am I right?
Through you, Madam Chair, if that question is diverted towards me, I would be very disappointed if this directed staff to do anything other than to give us information and their opinion.
Awesome. Thank you very much.
Next, Trustee Chair Noslin. Oh, or no? Sorry, no. Trustee Dawson.
Thank you. And through the chair, just so I understand continuing education, when a student graduates secondary school, actually, let me rephrase. When a student is past the age of being able to be enrolled in grade 12, are they going to continuing education to finish secondary school? Like how many, if you know, what percentage of students would be those who are not, truly adults who've taken a break and are coming back, but students who, didn't graduate in grade 12 and just need a few more courses? What is adult, essentially? What does that mean in the context of secondary school, through the chair?
Yeah, I'll pass it to Associate Director Srisco.
Thank you, and through the chair to Trustee Dawson. 18 and over, Trustee Dawson, would be an adult. Students may stay in school to age 21. Those are typically students with special education needs. But for a student who is expected to graduate at 18, may be returning back for additional credits, may go to adult day school, there are a number of placement options that they have. So I hope that supports your question. In addition, we may have much older students who are coming back to earn their OSSD as they are wanting to find a pathway to stronger employment, or coming to Ontario or Canada for the first time, and we look at equivalency. So we are supporting the education of our society through Con Ed.
Okay, thank you. And through the chair, do we have a breakdown of those categories and what percentage of the student population they make up in continuing education? Through the chair.
Thank you, through the chair. Trustee Dawson, we don't have that report currently. I would need to work with Central Superintendent Chang to be developing that data for you as part of the larger analysis, to be looking at a way to restructure, to analyze where the deficit is being generated from, and to be making the staffing decisions and the reorganization of where our locations are situated across our district, to be finding the efficiency. So we would be looking at staffing levels, class enrollment levels, the number of staff that we currently have on contract, where funding may be directed elsewhere, to be coming to an operational decision on how to make sure that we are not running as significant as a deficit as we are.
Okay, thank you. That's helpful. Yeah. With respect to special education, I keep hearing this mention of our reduction in need. Excuse me. And, you know, that's not what I'm seeing in my communities. But I wonder how many of these positions or spec ed positions in general are not being used to support students with special education needs as designated by an IPRC, but for students who are struggling with their achievement due to behavioral exceptionalities, like for instance ADHD. So I'm concerned about this language of a reduction in need as a justification for cuts. And so what I'm trying to understand is what is need versus, you know, as designated by IPRC versus what we're actually using this staff for. I hope that question makes sense. Through the chair.
Thank you. Passing it back to Associate Director Ceresco.
Thank you, and through the chair to Trustee Dawson. Trustee Dawson, perhaps I'll be using my phrasing really precisely. I think that all of our students at one point in time are going to be demonstrating a need. All of us do. When we're referring to students who are accessing students with special education supports and services, we would describe them as students who are identified or students who are not identified. Our trend data in the TDSB is indicating that we have fewer students both who are identified and who are not identified. And that correlation, I think, also makes sense because our enrollment is generally decreasing as a board. In addition, we have been working hard to understand and better outcomes for students and how an early placement or creation, of an IEP for a student, not necessarily identified. So a teacher is noticing a student may need some support, and historically, we would have created an IEP for that student, indicating that they're a non-identified student with an IEP. When we studied that data, what we saw was that we were generating a large number of IEPs for students who were racialized and who were underrepresented and underserved. So that concerned us. We have been working very diligently with our primary teachers to be asking for them not to be initiating an IEP, but instead to be initiating something called an ILP, an individualized learning plan, where really good teaching, instructional strategies are put into place. So that can also be contributing to the trend data that we're seeing that fewer of our students are indicating as non-identified. Our students still require and need support, and our special education teams are still working with those classroom teachers to be supporting the modifications or the accommodations needed for those students in class. So I hope that provides some clarity around the difference between data trending down for students who are identified and not identified, but be reaffirming that our students are still our students, and the need is certainly still there, and staff are available to be supporting those students with need.
Okay, thanks. For the record, I am not seeing a reduction in need in my ward. And in fact, I'm seeing more of a need for special needs assistance, specifically, and EAs. And that has a lot to do with, potentially the impact of the pandemic on mental health and behavior. So how is mental health factored in with these special education staff? Are they supporting students with mental health needs? And is that accounted for through the chair?
Thank you, and through the chair to Trustee Dawson. Certainly, we recognize, and all of us have seen, through the pandemic, increased needs for the mental health, not only of our students, but also staff. The pandemic recovery funding provided funds for 16 social workers and 15 child and youth counselors, in addition to the allocation that the board previously had. And of course, we know, and thank you for your advocacy to the ministry in articulating that need still persists, but the ministry has eliminated COVID funding. So in previous explanation to the board, those positions have been removed because the funding source has also been removed. We have a very strong mental health team here at TDSB, and I'm not going to pretend that our ratios are going to remain the same. That's not possible with those reductions being removed from our system. But what I can be assuring the board is that we will be very strategic in designing supports across the level of need tiers 1, 2, and 3 for our students. But certainly, through you, Trustee Dawson, the ratio level between social workers and child and youth counselors will be going up. However, I would articulate, and this is important, that our ratios levels are going back to our pre-COVID ratios, and our enrollment has decreased. So that hope is some reassurance that we're at pre-COVID levels in our ratios. Thank you.
Okay. So through the chair, just to give a concrete example, if I have multiple classrooms where kids are posing a safety risk, they're lashing out, flipping tables, flipping chairs, and that is happening when there is not the additional support of an SNA, is that behavior considered something that needs to be supported by a special education staff?
Thank you, and through the chair. The principal would have a duty, Trustee Dawson, to be making sure that that student was supported and using all of the resources at his or her disposal with the staff, and to be following our procedures as far as pulling that school team together to be talking about that student, understanding their profile, accessing our special education teams centrally, to be making sure the student's program was appropriately planned for. If that student needed the support of an SNA or an EA, that recommendation would be coming through the team meeting. And we would be working with parents to best understand that student's profile.
Okay, thank you. And this is just a comment. I am seeing an increase in that type of violence happening in classrooms, and the response that I'm seeing is 3 weeks of an SNA going in, modeling behavior for the teacher, and then things falling apart again because of the class sizes and the teacher's inability to full-time manage a student's behavior. So, you know, that's a comment I think is really important. I can't imagine my colleagues aren't seeing the same. So I hope that when we are providing a report back on this, that we can fully understand what the impact to that kind of classroom support will be. Thank you.
Thank you. Trustee Charnoslin?
Thank you. So I don't have a problem with part one, but my question with part two, and this is, I guess, a question to staff, because I want to just make sure I understand it correctly. It's staff's position that there is no extra money in continuing education. It's losing us money, correct?
So through the chair, yeah, currently special education has a $6.7 million deficit. As part of the options to balance, we feel that by really looking at class sizes that we were able to find about $300,000 to bring this down to a $6.4 million deficit. So that $300,000 is already considered in our options to balance. And so if we were to spend it on additional staffing, then it would increase our deficit.
So it would increase our deficit if we were to spend it on the 35 staff.
That's correct.
So I guess I'm not really understanding how we can vote in favor of part two, I guess. Like, I understand the concerns around losing staff, particularly special education support staff, particularly pandemic recovery funds. I understand the concern that trustees have, and Trustee Lee in particular. I understand the concerns. I guess my question is just how one pays for the other. I don't actually see how staff can provide a plan for this if staff is telling us that there isn't money in continuing education, if I'm understanding this correctly. So I guess that's more of a comment than, I don't know if staff want to comment on that, anything further, but I'm not clear how we get that money from something that can't give us that money, I guess. So I won't be voting in favor of part two, and I guess I would just ask staff if they have anything further to comment on.
So through the chair, what I would say is that staff do recognize that we do need to get to a more balanced position for continuing education, but that it will take time. And I think Associate Director Sarisco indicated some of the ways that would happen, whether it's, reducing the number of sites, staff, in order to be able to get us to a balanced position. Once we get to that position, it will free up budget dollars, right? If we were able to make all the reductions to have $6.7 million of savings, we would have $6.7 million in our budget to be able to either help us to balance or to add back. But staff does not believe that next year, due to staffing timelines, due to the significant changes, that it could impact programming for the continuing education in the specific areas that we mentioned earlier, that we believe that we need to look at that over the course of the next year in order to bring forward options to reduce this deficit in future years.
Okay, so really this is something that long-term we're looking to hopefully tighten up how continuing education is working so that it is financially in a better position. Obviously, we want to make sure we're supporting the idea of continuing education. We know we have people who really enjoy these programs, who get great benefit from it, but we want to make sure that we're getting, like our class sizes are optimized and all of those pieces. So I guess to me, this is more of a long-term thing, and I don't, just from hearing from staff tonight, I don't see how we could do this to reverse those 35 FTE this year. So I guess that's my position on it, but I'll be supporting part one. Thank you.
Thank you, and we have Trustee Lee.
Thank you, through you, Madam Chair. I really appreciate all the comments from both our colleague trustees and staff member. I just want to, first of all, clarify Trustee Tromsland's question a little bit, just because my understanding of the situation is that staff member have said we may have the ability to make some changes towards the second half of next year, right? So I think the answer to that question is it's not an absolute no. It's a we can't do anything for September, but perhaps there are ways of making this better on the second half. So I think responsibly, until we see the report, until we see our staff's opinion, I think it's premature to say whether or not there are things that can be done. And that's regarding to part two of the motion here. So I hope, once again, we're looking for a report. We're not looking for commitment. And if the report comes out to be, we've dug under every stone and there's no way for us to do it, then as trustees, that is something that we can tell our community and something, and also what we can, advise our CAC on special education of where the situation is. Without knowing these, without seeing a report, without going into the details, I cannot say that I have responsibly tried my best. And that's, I think, at this point, what I'm looking to do is give us a chance to do our best for our students. And to be able to confidently say that there is no stone that we haven't looked under. There's no opportunity that we have forgone. Right? So that is really the purpose of this motion. And the second question I have is with regarding to part three. I'm a little bit confused by all the entire budget situation because my understanding of the options to balance is that we're looking to remove 9 million from this year's budget. But I get it. Now, if staff, you're saying that we're going to pause it, then are we parking that budget item somewhere? Is it an accrual? Or is it that we'll have an option towards the second half of this year and we'll immediately go into a bigger deficit because we didn't budget for it? So I'd just like to have some clarity from staff on this one.
Thank you, and through the chair. So I will try and try to be a little clearer. It is a confusing situation. So we purchased the devices out of the year before's budget for the next year. So we're purchasing devices in this year's budget for September. We would usually purchase budget next summer. We would use the 23-24 budget in order to purchase devices for 24-25. So we're suggesting that we do not purchase those devices out of the 23-24 budget and instead use 23-24 to review all of the possibilities that are available to possibly reduce this amount, and then to bring it forward as part of the 24-25 budget. But rather than spend it in the summer of 25, we would spend it in the fall of 24 for the 24-25 year.
So through you, Madam Chair, I think I understand that. In plain words, we are burdening fiscal year 24-25's budget with 2 years worth of device purchases. So in the most extreme case, if staff reviews the entire process and find that there's no way for us to save money and we have to spend 9 million, I know this is an extreme case, but I'm trying to make a point. But if this were the case, then for the fiscal year 24-25, we would need to find $18 million for devices.
If we were to, so there's two things there. 24-25 is the fourth year of the implementation. So then all of our grade 5 through 12s would have a device. So they would be returning those devices. So there may be potential savings. We need to look at whether those devices can be reused and redistributed and that type of thing. So there is a potential for reduction there. But you're right, at some point we either catch up with 2 years or we continue to purchase in the fall for the year that we actually have the expense in the year that is incurred moving forward.
Okay. Okay, and thank you, through Madam Chair. I really appreciate that explanation. I understand that there will be savings, but I actually am very uncomfortable with burdening a accrual, burdening a expense that we intend to make without accruing it ahead of time, because we're going to be right back here next year having the same conversation, only the conversation will be twice as hard because we have to pay for 2 years worth of devices. And this is the reason why, to all of my trustee colleagues, why I felt like we at least needed a high level view from our staff team on what that number could look like. Maybe we don't set aside 9 million. Maybe we set aside 5 or 4, some number, because if we don't do it next year, next June, we'll have to come back here and potentially cut more stuff to pay for the devices, because eventually we have to pay up. This is not a cost that we can, continuously carry forward and not pay back. And I'd like to, get staff's opinion on this one. Thank you.
So through the chair, you are correct that if we were to move back to the practice of purchasing devices in the summer for September, that in 1 year there could be potentially 2 years worth of purchases. That being said, if we use the time next year to be able to determine exactly what you're asking us to determine whether or not there's a reduction that can be made, it's possible that the amount for 24-25 could be 9 million, and that could cover 2 years worth of expenditures. So I'm not sure by next week we would be in a position to be able to say what would be a reasonable amount to set aside. There's also the revised budget process, which happens in the fall, near the sort of the November, December timeframe, when we have our enrollments for October. And at that point, we may be in a position where we could say, through the revised process, we could look at purchasing in the summer for the next year if we had the opportunity to do that review. So I think there are a couple of different places to look into this. If we are to add $5 million, say, just as a number, to the 23-24 budget, we are adding $25 or $5 million to the deficit. So, I think if we're all aware that that's happening, then we would have to find that money elsewhere in order for us to be able to balance next year's budget.
Yeah, thank you. Through Madam Chair, I just think we will eventually have to find that money, but I'm okay if we say that we'll come back and take a look at what the situation looks like in the fall, just because I'm also one of those optimists that believe that our enrollment will be, I think, a bit better than what we had forecasted, as I have made that comment before. So does it help staff if we changed number 3 on this motion, change the timing from next week to before the fall budget update?
I thought I heard they're bringing
Fall before the fall. Okay. Yes, I'm hearing yes on
Okay.
the fall budget timing.
Okay. Through you, Madam Chair, can I just ask the indulgence of our governance staff to help me change the timing on that one? Right. So 1 and 2 can be by the 20th. Number 3 can be by the fall budget update. If that's okay.
They're working on it.
Yeah,
And if that's okay with you, Trustee DeVitas as well.
perfect. And,
Yeah,
oh, sorry.
that was fine. Yeah, thank you, Trustee Lee.
And we have another question from Trustee McLean.
Thank you, and through the chair. I guess I heard staff's response and I interpreted it differently than Trustee Lee, so I'm going to apologize to everyone and ask kind of again. Staff indicated that you could do a report for the 20th, but you're intending to do a more comprehensive report as it pertains to continuing education next year for the 24-25 budget year. But you kind of opened a door pertaining to there might be some room in terms of the potential savings for the second semester of 23-24. Do you believe that you can identify that potential savings in time for the report of December 20th, which will allow us, in essence, to identify savings and apply them to the budget process? Is that what you're suggesting? Because my sense of what Trustee Lee is hoping for is that was, so I'd like to better understand so that we all have what we're going to get on the 20th.
Thank you, and through the chair. That was an excellent summary. Trustee McLean, we will not be able to provide a plan to fulfill the statement in II of the motion in time. This is a very significant review. We will absolutely continue to look at continuing education before the 20th. If there are any further suggestions to get to balance, we will look again and provide that to the team. I don't think that would be possible when I was talking about semester 2. We would need students to enroll first before we would be able to predict where the savings would be. So again, it comes into the challenge of timing. Regrettably, our deficit is going to continue into next year. And please be reassured that the team will do a very deep review to find a way to reduce that $6.7 million and discuss with the board the options, because as you've indicated, there are choices to be made.
Thank you.
I think we're just waiting for the motion to come back up on screen.
Madam Chair, can I ask this follow-up if there's no one else, just while we're waiting?
Certainly, go ahead.
Through Madam Chair, just for the section 2 of the motion, in the therefore be it resolved, what will be a better timing for us to get that, get that plan if we're able to make an interim change next year for the second semester?
Thank you, and through you to Trustee Lee. Trustee Lee, as I had mentioned, that any savings to semester 2 is going to be contingent on enrollment for our courses. What I want to be analyzing is how can we maximize and make sure that our classes are running at the highest level possible, and to be making staffing decisions, operational decisions about only running courses where we have maximum enrollment. I'm not able to provide that information as a savings amount because I don't yet have the enrollment.
I fully understand, through Madam Chair. Well, I'm just trying to get a sense on when that timing would be, just because I don't know right now.
Thank you, and through you, Chair, to Trustee Lee. I'm going to have to take that away, Trustee Lee. I can say it's not going to be before the June 20th. I think it will be wrapped up into our review and time for our suggested plan to find savings. Once I understand
I guess through Madam Chair, I guess what I'm trying to figure out is, would the fall budget review be a good timing, or is that too early still?
I think that's too early, Trustee Lee. I would say spring, as we are getting into budget season, spring. And if it's earlier, we will bring it to you.
Okay, well then, through you, Madam Chair, I'm not sure how we would change that, because I think we would like to see a review, but I don't think this is appropriate anymore. If you agree with me, Trustee DeVitis, maybe the option is to cross it out, or maybe change to a different date. I'm okay with either. We'll.
So I think I'm hearing change the date. Sorry, but is the date in A?
Change the date for section 2, or just cross, why don't we just cross it out, Madam Chair? Sorry to be workshopping it here, just because what I'm hearing from staff is that second part of that report is not feasible. Well, we can move it later.
Within that timeline.
Yeah.
Okay, sorry.
Which second?
I'm a little lost.
What second part?
So
A2 or
A2?
A2.
A2, okay. So, Okay, so we want to break down, for June 20th, we want a breakdown of what's under the continuing education deficit. And then, sorry, do you want to drop part 2 or do you want to delay part 2?
Let's delay part 2. So let's break A2 out of A and put that into C and just say director provide that plan when ready within the 2023-24 school year.
Okay.
To put back for spec ed.
Yeah, that's for the spec ed section, if that's okay.
It's at, okay. 1 second. Just have to ask for clarification.
That's next year's budget process.
Yeah. No, but we could add in here.
And I think I heard Trustee Laskin saying that's next year. Yes, I think if it comes late enough, it will be for next year. But I just want to make sure that we have that plan before the budget discussion starts, so that we don't get to this point right now where we're out of time and we have to make some decisions.
Okay. I get your point. I just have to tweak the wording.
Thank you.
Trustee Laskin?
Sorry, I'm quite confused. Are you then saying the part 2 is obligating us for next year's budget process to use those savings for spec ed, for 35 spec ed teachers?
No, Trustee Laskin, the part 2 is asking for a report. It's not obligating us to anything.
So why would you include, if it's for next year's budget process, why are you including any reference to spec ed teachers? You're just asking about the cost savings, right? That should
Well,
be applied to
I'm also
budget.
asking for a report on how in the next year, in an upcoming budget, these cost savings can be transferred into spec ed teachers. Right? It's a report. It's not a commitment.
Sorry. Can I see that?
Sorry, I don't think 3 is still right, is it?
Can we just change plan to a report, provide a plan to provide a report?
Provide a report prior to the June 20th meeting.
I guess all I'm saying, through you, Madam Chair, to Trustee Lee, is that when we get the report, we will be into next year's budget process, which means why are we obligating now to reverse a 35 FTE reduction to spec ed staff when we might have different priorities? I'm not saying spec ed isn't a priority, but I just don't see, if we're not getting a plan to use the savings till later next year, it has nothing to do with this year's budget.
Trustee Laskin, I'm asking for a report. I'm not asking for an obligation. And just, I just want to be cognizant of budget planning timelines and how everything works, right? We run out of time every single year with making decisions, right? We constantly hear from staff on certain things when we ask questions on whether or not we still have time to come up with a report or come up with a decision or get more information. So this is just to make sure that by the time staff have the information available, we set staff up for success and ask them to give us that plan and a report so that we can have the information we need to make a decision. This is for future planning, right? My understanding from our staff is that the earliest we can get this information is probably by February or even perhaps March next year. So that is right before our budget timeline. This is to make sure that we get it as soon as possible.
I appreciate that and support that. So that the director provide a report on a plan to use savings from continuing education deficit reduction. Get that. But you really want to tie that to reverse 35 FTEs to spec ed staff for 2024, 2025 budget? Or do you just want the report so we can apply it to the budget priorities for 2024, 2025?
Or specific.
It doesn't specifically mention anything, Trustee Laskin, just as we want a report. I think we're going too far into the request for a report conversation right now. right? I think until we get a report to see what the report says, we don't have the ability to tie that into anything.
Sorry, but that's not what 3 says right now.
What does 3
So
say?
I think, okay, so it says 35 FTE in number 3. So but the goal would be to support, if I can clarify, the goal would be to support special education staffing, support staff. Is that?
Correct. Correct.
So.
Right. The context is that we cut 35 special ed staff this year, right? And we like to have some of that back. And if we want to add, Trustee Laskin, if you want to change the wording to make you comfortable, maybe say reverse up to, or take away the 35, and just say reverse the reduction to special education. I'm happy with that. The intention is to say we want a plan to, reduce the deficit on special education if where possible and fund special education. We're looking for a plan and a report. We're not looking for a commitment. And I understand, this is often a political forum, but I think we have to look beyond the politics sometimes and really look at, what we're doing for our students. I think right now the best we can do is to understand how we can best help our students going forward. And I believe this plan is the right thing to do.
Trustee Lee, is Trustee Leovitis here. Just so we can sort of move forward in this, would it be okay then to remove the number of the 35 FTEs and continue the rest so that we have the intent without being tied to a specific number that may not have any value next year?
I think that's fair. I would agree to that if that's the will of the committee.
All right. Thank you, Trustee Lee.
Just remove the 35, just special. Sorry, Denise. Sorry, Denise. We're back and forth. Sorry, just removing the number, the 35 FTA, sorry, just removing the number in number 3. So it would highlight that summary, it would highlight a plan to restore the special education staffing that were removed via the COVID funding? Okay. Okay. Yes, so Trustee Lee and Trustee DeVitis, can you confirm what's on the screen?
I'm okay with it.
Ditto. Thank you, Trustee Lee.
Okay, thank you very much. Do we have any further questions? Trustee Laskin.
Can we please vote ad seriatim, Madam Chair?
Certainly. Okay, seeing no further questions, could staff open the vote? And the request is for ad seriatim. So the vote's coming up as number 5.
I just voted, I assume it's number 1.
So this is number 1?
Okay, one second. Yeah. I think, okay, it's just, sorry.
This is part A.
This is, this is item number 1 on here, or what was part A. so that the director provide a report prior to June 20th, 2023 meeting of FPEC outlining an itemized breakdown of the 6.7 million net deficit for continuing education. Oh, Trustee Lee, how do you vote?
And in favor.
Oh, in
That was Shannon Lee in favor.
Patel in favor.
Thank you. Yeah. Yes. Trustee Chair Nelson? Okay, thank you. Thank you, that carries. Part B or item 2?
Lee's in favor.
And in favor.
Patel in favor.
They voted in favor. Lee and Shen, they were in favor. That carries, thank you. Okay. Mm-hmm. Okay, and part 3. Vote is open.
And in favor.
Patel in favor.
Thank you. And Trustee Lee.
Lee's in.
Okay, that carries. Thank you very much. I know we have 2 more motions coming from McLean and Earhart, but I'm going to ask for 10 minutes break to go to the washroom. Snack. where we left off. Next on the list, we had Trustee McLean.
Thank you, and through the chair, I would like to put forth a business arising motion. I believe Ms. Joseph Dowers has it. I had the ability to, and Trustee Chernos-Lynn is gracious enough to second. We sent it to trustees. I followed up with members of the committee in the last day. This is in essence a lot of the feedback I got in the community, and certainly at our budget ward forum. People are still worried about the effects of the pandemic, and that we're not totally, and we're still experiencing some of the effects, and everyone is keenly aware of the need of supports for mental health and well-being. So this is designed to replace the worker, or to reinstate the workers that were eliminated through the cuts to the COVID relief funding. So it's the reduction of previously ministry-funded COVID enhancements, social workers, and child and youth counselors, where some students are still suffering the effects of the pandemic, and when some students are still struggling with their mental health and well-being, and whereas social workers and child and youth counselors have been invaluable assisting students, staff, and school communities deal with the effects of the pandemic. Therefore, be it resolved that the Director of Education reinstate 15 social workers and 16 CYCs that were lost as the result of the Ministry of Education's elimination of the pandemic funding. And the estimated cost of that is $3.7 million. And as the policy with SBEC, when we spend money, we have to indicate where we're anticipating getting that money from. So since all expenditures must be funded, these added to the previously staff identified reductions to be funded through the use of proceeds of disposition. It should also be noted, in the event that more than the targeted amount of $5 million in SIP savings can be found, then those additional savings can potentially be applied to the budget and reduce the amount of POD to be used. In York, they have less students with special education requirements than we do, and they were north of 10 million when they did it. So while we're optimistic that there will be additional money found there, when we commit to this tonight, we would have to commit to the use of the POD, because that's an unknown, and we can't assume that's forthcoming. And I guess I'll just close with, I thought it was really interesting that we had 2 high school seniors last night come and talk to us, secondary school, grade 12 students, about wanting to advocate for important things that made their experience so much better and manageable throughout the pandemic. And one of the things they talked about was the CYCs and the social workers. And I think we all understand the use of the benefits of the services that these employees provide. So I'll leave it with that and look forward to the conversation with staff and our colleagues.
Okay. First questions from Trustee Laskin.
Thank you very much. Through you, Madam Chair. Can you help me again understand what the restrictions are around the use of POD? And through you to staff, I think I remember staff saying that the justification for the POD from the amount that's in the budget was as an offset if we had been allowed to close small schools. It was top-up funding, like the equivalent of the top-up funding we used to get. So I'm just, and I do understand the goal is that the SIP funding pays for this. because that was a guesstimate. The 5 million was a guesstimate, and my colleague mentioned that other boards have gotten as much as 10. But I guess I'm wondering about, and I support this, don't get me wrong, but would this jeopardize our use of POD funding for the other purpose? Or would the ministry see it as just use of POD funding and not differentiate between the two uses? I'm wondering if staff have any feedback or information from the ministry on using POD for these purposes. Thank you, Madam Chair.
So thank you, and through the chair. First, I'll talk about proceeds disposition in general. So obviously, we receive proceeds of disposition when we sell properties, and that money is expected under regulation to be used to address renewal needs. That being said, the ministry can provide exceptions, and so we would have to ask for permission to use proceeds of disposition. The way that the original $12 million was provided was that staff looked at if the moratorium were to be lifted and we were to allowed to be able to right size, and I'm using the ministry's wording, that we would save approximately $12 million in operating costs. And so that's where that initial $12 million came from. With regards to using additional funding, we would require, again, permission from the ministry, both for the $12 million and the additional 3.7. And I think we would have to provide the rationale. I would say that 3.7 will bring us close to 16 million. That's almost 20% of our unencumbered proceeds of disposition. And I would say that that's probably the maximum that staff would be comfortable with, or even the ministry hasn't indicated what their limit necessarily is, or whether or not they would approve. But I would say that from a staff perspective, 16 million would be, again, on the top end of what would be able to be used without impacting the capital plan moving forward.
Just a follow-up through you, Madam Chair. So when we, assuming this and the 12 million are included in our budget plan that we would be presenting to the ministry, is there a risk that they would, and the board approved it, is there a risk that they would say back to you, no, cut further? Or from your perspective, your advice is you've had enough conversation with the ministry that proceeds of these one-time use of proceeds of disposition is a way forward. Yeah, I'll stop there. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Through the chair, if I can address this question. The ministry has certainly been in conversation with both staff as well as staff and the chair of the board. The ministry has been open to the use of proceeds of disposition to the amount of $12 million. There was some indication that a little bit more might be also considered. I do think that we were cautioned about using proceeds of disposition to fund larger portions of our budget, knowing that it's not sustainable. I would advise the board to consider this as an ask. And until we have received confirmation in writing that it is approved, that we be cognizant that we may be asked to go back and to make adjustments to what their final total of approval is.
Then through you, Madam Chair, I'm comfortable supporting this because I would love the ministry to come back to us and tell us that supporting our students dealing with the effects of the pandemic through social workers and child and youth counselors is not an appropriate use of funding when they in fact should be funding it through their COVID funding. Thank you.
Thank you, and through the chair, and I just want to make one other comment about the SIP funding. So as we know, we have incurred expenses to date that we are going to ask the ministry to reimburse us for. And so we are hoping for a greater reimbursement than $5 million. It's not necessarily additional funding that comes in to, it is reimbursing us for costs that already exist. So I think that's the difference between saying that we're going to use SIP money for something that doesn't necessarily support special education. It's that we're going to get reimbursed for some of the costs that we've already incurred related to special education that then helps us to balance our budget. And I think that that's a really important distinction, even though it is saying that something very similar, that we are going to free up funding, but it's not that we're going to use SIP funding to pay for this. It's that the SIP funding that's going to be reimbursed will free up, will help us to reduce our deficit.
Sorry, Madam Chair, then I wonder if that should be clarified. The targeted amount of $5 million in SIP savings can be found and costs reimbursed, or something like that, so that it does make it clear that we're not using SIP funding to fund this.
Yeah, I'm happy to indicate that that the additional savings would reduce, in essence, reduce the deficit, the deficit, and then which frees up the money.
So I think the only thing that we may need to change in here is versus SIP savings, if we said SIP reimbursements.
Savings to reimbursements.
Right.
Excellent. Thank you, Madam Chair. And can I assume that didn't need an amendment, that the mover and the seconder were just changing their wording?
I don't care to the wording, so I'm happy. The director was kind enough to. Can I make an amendment to my own motion? Is that how is that what's required? Apparently, I got the numbers mixed up. Apparently, it's 15 CYCs and 16 social workers.
It's flipped, the 15 and 16.
Yeah, it's 31 staff in total, but it's 16 social workers and 15. I apologize for the error, and I appreciate the heads up.
Doesn't matter how many times.
Okay. Trustee Earhart?
Thank you. I don't know if the movers would consider this, but I was intending to put forward a motion just after this, considering a similar funding source around reinstating the 6 elementary VP positions that were lost as a result of the Ministry of Education's COVID funding. So I'd put it to the group to perhaps consider amending for that addition within this as well. That would be a cost of $840,000. I'm happy to speak more on my rationale for that motion, but I would invite us to consider that perhaps it could also be added into this.
Different.
If it please, through the chair, I think it would be better if they were separate because staff has indicated 16 is kind of their line. And I can appreciate the need and I understand the benefit. But if we're going to do it, I think we should do it separately and then, in essence, decide whether we're willing to go to 16 and then whether we're then willing to go to 16.8, I guess, given the recommendation we got from staff tonight, around 16 being, and the 20%, being the level that they would recommend. So I'm sorry, but I think separately will is the better way to go. Sorry.
Okay, that's the last person on the speakers list. So, did we open the vote? We have the numbers correct?
Sorry, Madam Chair, I really wanted to ask a question, if you don't mind. I took my name
Yes,
up.
go ahead.
Is that okay, Madam Chair?
Yes, sorry.
Oh, yeah, thank you. So, sorry, through you, Chair, quick question on the funding that this is coming from. Like, what is the replenishment rate of the proceeds of disposition? I just want to get a sense of, like, when we spend 3.7 here, and then, when we build another school or when we upgrade another school and we run out of money, we usually dip into this fund. Like, at what point do we start jeopardizing that ability?
So thank you, and through the chair, Trustee Lee, it is a good question, and right now, including the $12 million, we were at $85 million of unencumbered proceeds of disposition. Obviously, as we continue to declare property surplus, as we did last week, and then to sell those properties, we build that amount up again. But we do know, and as staff works towards a very comprehensive capital plan that will use proceeds of disposition in order to deal with the deferred maintenance that TDSB has. Proceeds of disposition is an important funding source for that capital plan. So again, this is definitely not a permanent solution, and I would have a hard time going above the 20% again, as I reiterated before, to ensure that we are able to use the proceeds as intended in order to deal with the deferred maintenance needs of the board.
Thank you. And through Madam Chair, to staff, or maybe Associate Director Zucker, what is our surplus? What is the total value of our surplus property held for sale as it current stands? I just trying to figure out what the potential pool of that number looks like.
158 or something.
So thank you, and through the chair, I think if we were to get into specifics, we would need to go into private, but just as a general information, TLC budgets approximately $150 million a year that we would receive in proceeds of disposition.
You're on mute, James.
Sorry, so sorry. Thank you for reminding me, Trustee Laskin. Is that from leasing properties out, or is it just basically averaged out proceeds from selling stuff?
Sales.
Through the chair, that would be funding for the sales of property, whether it's property that is currently surplus to the board, or as we move to close schools, we would continue to increase our number of surplus properties.
Got it. And would that be like a 10-year forecast, or is that like a short-term 2-year forecast of 150 million, 150 a year?
Through the chair, right now, it's been the amount that we've been looking at annually. As we move more into say, the secondary program strategy, and we're able to start implementing that, that number could possibly change. But right now, that's our best estimate annually and moving forward.
Okay, that makes sense. So the math, the quick math I'm doing is that we taking 150 million a year. The fact that we have 80 left, it means we spent 70 on last year on something. So okay, so this is not the first time that we spent this money in some things. Probably for operational recurring expenditures, but we do spend it fairly frequently. Is that correct?
Yes, through the chair, whether we use it for renewal needs, whether we use it to supplement the funding that we receive from the ministry for new capital builds, that's become a significant component as well. When the benchmarks don't provide us enough funding to build new schools. And we have used some in other areas as well.
Thank you. My other question to the movers, Trustee McLean and Chair Charles Lin, is are you willing to add in a clause that will redirect funding from any additional revenue we gain due to higher than forecasting enrollment, instead of using proceeds of distribution? So for example, we are currently forecasting a 200 student pupil enrollment drop. If that number becomes better, or if we get more students, we should probably divert that revenue into this line item first, instead of using the proceeds. Is that something that you're willing to put on as a addendum to this?
I guess I initially, through the chair, my question is to staff, has that become an effective budgeting tool? If we're making projections, we've made projections with regards to students that we're anticipating, and our budget's based on that. Are we allowed to word this in such a manner that, like, now it becomes an accountant's question, I guess, is more than.
Yeah, so through the chair, when the actual enrollment comes in the fall, obviously sometimes increased enrollment means increased costs, like additional teachers or additional supports for those students. But staff would automatically, through our revised budget process, adjust accordingly and use whatever, if there was additional funding, to offset the current year budget. So we would use, whether or not it was this instance or other instances, we would reduce our deficit first before using proceeds of disposition.
Given that, then I don't think the suggestion, you're free to make an amendment, I guess, if you like, but I think given the explanation staff provided, I'm inclined to leave it as stated.
Thank you, Trustee McLean. I just want to clarify on that. Just because, are there any other operating expenditure items that are using proceeds of disposition right now? That's the funding source, to staff?
Through the chair, the $12 million that staff is recommending as an option to balance, I guess technically is being used to support operating. And I guess if we were looking at what it's specifically supporting, would be the operating costs of the schools that we would be otherwise closing if we were able to do so.
Got it. So this would just, through you, Madam Chair, this would just add to that 12 and make it 15. Is that what's happening?
Through the chair, yeah, 15.7.
Okay. So there's no board direction required to use any surplus from enhanced enrollment to reduce spending on proceeds of I can't remember from selling our properties. We don't need to give you direction for that. You just do it automatically then.
That's correct.
Got it. Thank you.
Trustee King?
Thank you, through the chair, and forgive me being off camera, it's dinner time here. I just wanted to understand a little bit about what's possible or what might be considered with respect to part one of the motion, I'm thinking about if we were willing to go to the threshold that is advised by staff in terms of use of the POD for the 32 positions that are outlined here, and if we weren't willing to go beyond that for the consideration of the elementary VPs that Trustee Earhart mentioned, could there be room to reevaluate the mix of roles within that threshold of spend to possibly include some elementary VP? So I'm asking, I guess, with this motion, is it specific and restricted to only the social workers and the CYCs, or could there be room to consider an additional role within the same amount of spending? And I guess that would be a question for the movers, I think, through the chair.
Thank you, and through the chair. This was designed to put back that which was clearly, these positions were clearly inside the COVID relief funding, and so that's why these were chosen. And it, the services that are provided clearly go to help supporting students, and so this is what I thought was the appropriate use, and this is what we use the COVID relief funding for, to support these students in this way. I think services, there's lots of ways we can spend $3.7 million that support students, and I'm not, so trustees are free to make amendments if they're so inclined, and try to do this differently. I didn't start from 3.7 and decide to do this and do it in this way. I was chasing putting these positions back in and supporting students through this mechanism, and it happened to cost 3.7 million. The goal of the motion was to put these workers back in the school to provide these services in support of students, family, and staff. But is it the only way to spend 3.7 million? Clearly it's not.
Through the chair, thank you, Trustee McLean, for that. And I don't disagree at all with the value of these roles, and I completely understand the intent and what led you to that number. And I don't mean to set up a competition between roles at all either. I completely understand that the different roles bring different values and just in a different way. But I'm cognizant of, I guess, of the leadership value with the VP. And again, I'm a little bit of rambling here because I don't want to set it up as a competition. But I do think about what that leadership role brings as well in terms of how it's able to reach out to different resources and all that too. But point taken, there are probably many different permeations of the way we could apply staff in this way. But I did want to make sure that Trustee Earhart's points and concerns were heard as well, because I know that this is something that she's been very concerned about through the process too. Thank you. That's all.
Okay, I don't see anybody else on the speakers list, so could we open the vote on this?
Trustee Lees in favor.
Trustee Patel in favor.
Shan in favor.
In favor. Thank you, that carries. And next on the list, we have Trustee Earhart.
Thank you. And through the chair, I'm not a member of FBAC, but I wanted to invite FBAC to consider moving a motion related to reinstatement of elementary VP positions. And so during our March meetings, VP positions were removed as a result of anticipated loss of COVID funding. We were able to reinstate through other votes 20 of the 26 elementary VP positions that were being removed due to COVID funding. And this motion is proposing to reinstate the remaining 6 at what I believe would be an estimated cost of $840,000. So I would appreciate staff verification of that. Similar to the motion that was just approved, the proposal would be to be funded through the use of proceeds of disposition. I fully recognize there are challenges with that. My rationale for this is that I continue to see through the allocations process that what in my view are reductions that are not in the best interest of students and that I don't believe are in the best interests of school operations. I believe that staff are making the best allocation decisions possible with what they are being provided for positions and within the funding available, but the floor is still too low. I specifically provided trustees with an example, which is my child's school, which is losing 0.5 of a VP. I'm at that school every day. And so to me, this is not about my child's school, but it serves as an indicator of how far these losses are going. That they will be losing a 0.5 VP, they'll be losing an office administrator, they'll be losing 3 lunchroom supervisors. And as a form of compensation, what we have available, what our system has available to provide is a school-based safety monitor for an elementary school. I'm concerned with this, and I believe it's an indicator that we are going too low with our cuts to in-school staff and office administrators, VPs in particular. I believe that we need to keep adding back in elementary VP positions until we feel comfortable that schools can be operated safely, sustainably, and smoothly for all students and all workers' experience in the building. It may be that adding back 6.0 elementary VPs will not bring back the 0.5 VP that I am currently advocating for in my child's school. However, if there are other schools in the system that are experiencing what I'm seeing at my child's school, then I believe they need to have their VPs added back as well. We need to keep going until we feel all of our schools can operate smoothly and safely. And so that is my plea to the committee. I would ask that the committee consider a mover and seconder, and certainly if there are other funding sources that may be available for this, I hope that they could be considered. Thank you.
Yeah, go ahead.
So I can move that, Trustee Earhart. Happy to do that. We'll need a seconder to have a discussion about it.
I will second it for discussions as plea.
Thank you, Trustee Lee.
Can I speak to it as well?
Yes, go ahead.
So I want to thank Trustee Earhart for bringing this up. And I know that we understand this, and just going to start my comments by, in support of this motion, by reminding us that while we have a budget that balances for the purpose of our reporting to the Ministry of Education, this is not a budget that meets the needs of our school communities. And this, I think, is something that we all know, even though we have different views about what may be more or less important. I definitely see the need for support for some of the previous motions. So I voted in support of anything and everything that would reduce cuts in the system, and I'll continue to do that while I'm here, because I believe that we need to reduce the risk creating reductions in our system and that are being pushed onto us by the province. So we'll be supporting this. I know that this creates a conundrum in terms of our negotiations with the folks at the ministry. But to quote one of the previous speakers, if they tell us no, then, the worst that happens is that we have to go back and explain to the public that the province is saying to us that we can't do this. And if that is the case, then they have to rationalize that to the public. And I'm not sure that that's a problem that I can't live with. So I'm happy to go forward with this. I'm happy to support Trustee Arhart. And I think this is something that would be beneficial for us to support collectively. Thank you.
Next, we have Trustee Laskin.
Thank you very much, through you, Madam Chair. I have a problem with this coming now. We did, during the staffing conversation in March, we did move a motion to ask staff to consider putting back staff that was taken. And during that discussion, a subsequent discussion, there was a conversation with executive staff about there were still huge gaps to fill in schools regarding vice principals. And there was an ask about my understanding at least of what happened, and this I would like through you, Madam Chair, for staff to clarify, is that executive superintendents surveyed their superintendents to identify the needs within the schools. And the number that came up with was an additional 10 FTEs from the 10 FTEs that staff were proposing. And that was, that was 0.5 for 20 schools. I can only speak for my own area, but I know that every year, we as trustees put forward the resources and staff go through a process to prioritize how those resources are provided. And at that time, we moved that motion into the process so that the cost of those additional 10 could be included in the overall, and staff would understand through the options that they would be included in what came back to us to balance. I am concerned, I'm already concerned with the use of POD for staffing, but I am concerned that POD at this particular point becomes the kind of like the catch-all. So I ask through you, Madam Chair, for the movers of the motion to consider a funding source outside of POD, and then I could consider supporting it. But I don't believe that POD should be used for vice principal positions. Thank you, Madam Chair.
And sorry, Trustee Laskin, if that was a question directed to me, did you have a suggestion for a source of funding?
No, it's not my motion.
Oh, okay. So then I'm happy
So
to continue.
I'm suggesting that if you can identify a funding source for it, I could support it, but I can't support it through the use of POD. Thank you.
Trustee Jarnos-Lin.
So I'm just trying to think. So I'm a little bit concerned about this, largely because I feel like it's hard to know where we stop with VPs, because they do play an important role. And I know communities really feel a tremendous anxiety when they learn they're losing, even if it's a 0.5 VP. these are important individuals in their school communities. I'm wondering if staff could comment whether, like, I know in the past we've sometimes added VPs in the fall. I'm not suggesting we move them around or anything like that. We've sometimes done that. That's not great. But I guess just, you know, as we see how things are panning out in the fall, if this is something that's an option or whether staff has any further ideas. I have to say I'm very reluctant to go to POD on this. I'm nervous about the amount of POD we're using as it is. I'm comfortable where we're at. I'm nervous about going to more only because the minister has made it quite clear in discussions that he's concerned about us relying on this long term. And I do think it's hard to, like, we'll be here next year and we'll be here the year after. And I'm not so sure how to do that year after year after year, because it's really draining. And so I guess I would just ask staff if they see, you know, I just remember, I'm not suggesting we do it to learning centers or anything like that, but if the needs look different in the fall, what are our options? If I can ask that question, I don't know, through the chair.
Thank you very much. Through the chair, I will begin and then invite Associate Director Zucker to add. Staff could monitor enrollment as well as where we are at the end of the first quarter to determine whether or not we are on track for the projected deficit that we have shared with you, or whether there are additional cost savings or an enrollment increase that could be used to fund the additional vice principals. And so, you know, staff are open in consultation with Associate Director Zucker and Executive Officer Snyder. We could monitor both of these factors and bring forward a report that identifies the possibility of adding additional vice principals for all of the reasons that were shared this evening, as well as the reasons that have been discussed previously in the board and are supported by senior staff. I would welcome Associate Director Zucker to add any additional information to answer the question, please.
Thank you, and through the chair, I agree that, you know, in September we'll have a better idea of actual enrollment, or at least as we go through our reorganization. So that would be helpful in helping us to determine if there is going to be additional funding, or how much of the holdback for teachers, for example, that we would use. So there may be some potential to identify some savings at that time, and it may be a better opportunity to look at the use of or adding back additional vice principals.
Okay, thank you. And then I would just add that, like, I know when we look at large elementary schools, there are challenges, and especially ones that go sort of K to 8 or that are extremely large. And I just wonder, like, you know, just some feedback as we look at those numbers and we look at where there might be pressure points. It might not always be a VP. It could be it could be a different type of staff that a school might need. So I think we have to make sure that we're really responding to the system needs, but also the individual school needs. And so I hope as we as we think about this in the fall and we look not just at the actual numbers and student enrollment, that if we see schools that are really facing extraordinary challenges, that we're making sure that, and I think this is something that superintendents and executive superintendents really do. Just to assure trustees, this is another way of tackling that problem, maybe at that local level, making sure that we're, if there's a particular need for a certain amount of time or things like that, that we might be looking at it at the local level, sort of from a learning center perspective and the executive superintendent. Anyway, I'm kind of rambling at this point, but thank you.
Next, we have Trustee Lee.
Madam Chair, has Trustee King already gone? I forgot. Okay, but that's fine. I trust you. The question, I know I'm the second of this motion, but I'm really doing this, for discussion. I just want to get a sense from Trustee Earhart or staff or anyone, like if we've passed this and 6 VPs does get added back, what kind of schools, like what is the situation of those schools that these VPs are going to?
Trustee Earhart?
I'd have to defer to staff on that. Like, I have a vision that where I hope that VP add backs will be going based on need across the system. I have some barometers in my ward where I can see how the schools are functioning and the importance of the VPs to that functioning, not as individuals, but as a system. And so to me, that serves as an indicator on how we are doing system-wide. That's what I have as an indicator, that it's my child's school that I'm seeing with a great need, not the only need in my ward in terms of VPs. I have a school that was previously a model school that's losing VPs that's been in a fight. The reinstatement of VPs, as I understand it, stand to be supportive for the many, many schools in the ward I represent that will be losing VPs. However, I'm there every day at this school, so I see it. I see how the operations are going, and that is, I was elected because I'm a parent, and I see how this school and how schools are operating every day. So I use that knowledge when I'm coming here to the table. The allocation decisions and the prioritization will be made by staff, and so I'd want them to allocate. But if the schools that I am seeing are not getting added back, that means that we're still cutting further than that need that I'm observing, and that's a concern to me system-wide. I hope that's helpful.
It is, Trustee Earhart. Thank you so much. Can I just get a sense from staff on how this need compares to, elsewhere in the system? Is this something that, is this a gap that we're not closing, or that we weren't able to close, or is this general hardship that we see across the board? I'm trying to get a sense of, the problem that we're solving with this.
Yeah, go ahead.
So through the chair, Trustee Lee, I can speak to numbers in general. The number of VPs that we are allocated is very formula driven by the ministry when we receive the funding. So we do actually allocate as many VPs as we are allocated through the grant. And that is based on our per school enrollment. So it's based on a school by school enrollment. And then obviously our salaries for VPs are higher than the benchmarks in the ministry, so we actually spend more on VPs than we are funded for currently. So obviously, when we add back, we are spending more than we're funded for, and more FTE than we're calculated. We also 2 years ago would have had less VPs with higher enrollment, but we did add 38.5 with COVID funding, and therefore, that's what we've been allocating for the past 2 years. So that's what I would say, that there are some expectations there related to the additional that we've added over the past 2 years. But I'm not sure if anybody else would like to add anything.
Thank you very much. Through the chair, I can say on behalf of superintendents as well as principals and staff that there are additional needs in our system that are beyond the allocation that we currently have. We aspire to a day when our staffing for vice principals at elementary and secondary better responds to the needs that exist, student needs as well as operational needs, and to support the ongoing professional learning, mental health and well-being of staff, students, and community members as appropriate. That day, from our perspective and looking at the budget, we will need to have a system where there are larger groups of students in a number of schools. But I would say that there is an existing need beyond the funding that we have allocated to vice principals at this time.
Thank you, through you, Madam Chair. I think I should have phrased my questions more directly, but I think Associate Director Zurga answered a part of that. The allocation of VPs that we have given out today is actually more than it was for the 2019 school year. Is that correct? Because I know that we moved past the motion in the prior meeting to add back. Is it 20, I believe?
Yes, we added back 20.
Through the chair, that's correct.
Okay, so we have more VPs today than we did back in 2019, and we have less students. Is that correct?
That's correct.
Okay, can I just ask a more directed question? Did the criteria change? Because I hear Trustee Earhart's problem or concerns.
Yes.
Do we miss something? Is there like a gap in a couple of particular schools that we have to close?
I think maybe if staff could remind us when we changed the VP calculation. Is that one year ago, 2 years ago?
February 2022.
Perhaps Associate Director Salmon could assist us, or Executive Officer Snyder.
Through you, Madam Chair, I don't recollect right now. I'd have to do some research as to what year the formula was changed. Unless Associate Director Salmon can remember.
And through the chair, Associate Director Salmon, it cannot be very accurate, but I believe it was about 1.5 years ago that we brought a report to board in order that spoke to the changes, and the changes included changing the actual formula with respect to the schools that were highest on the LOI in order to allocate a 1.0 allocation. And it also changed the actual distribution of the 5 to 7 key factors that went into the VP allocation in order to increase the influence of things like the Learning Opportunities Index, such that we were trying to get at a more equitable distribution of VP allocations within the structure, and also really trying to ensure that the formula would get us to a place that was more equitable distribution of VPs at that time. And it was approximately around 1.5 years ago. Thank you.
Okay, thank you. I think that brings a bit more clarity. I really appreciate it.
Okay, that was all for you, Trustee Lee?
That's all for me.
Thank you. So Trustee DeVitis.
Trustee Laskin, did you want to speak to the last question?
Thank you very much. I know this well. It was the allocation formula was provided to us in a report in February of 2022. prior to the distribution of the 2022-2023 staffing. At that time, I support what Associate Director Salmon mentioned. You needed an enrollment in an elementary school of 455 in order to qualify just a base point total for 0.5 VP, but there were other points provided on LOI, French immersion, whether you had grade 8, etc. The issue was when the VPs were reduced when we first voted in March, the formula therefore had to change because there were fewer VPs. And what we discovered was you needed close to 500 elementary students to qualify for a 0.5 VP. And that is why at the time there were a lot of significant issues after the staffing was distributed. And that is why staff came back with a report saying they'd add back 10 FTEs. In surveying the superintendents, at least my superintendents, the conversation was that wouldn't be enough. And that's why, as I mentioned before, the executive superintendents were charged with surveying their superintendents to come up with the priorities of each of the superintendents in the area schools. And that's why we moved to add back an additional 10. So even though the formula was provided, it wasn't really used for the initial distribution because there were so fewer VPs. But the same factors of the formula, enrollment, LOI, grade 8, special programs, French immersion, they were considered in the allocation formula. So I just wanted to clarify that because I did investigate that prior to moving the motion about bringing the additional 10.
Thank you, Trustee Lasking. Listening to our Chair, Chairman Lynn, I had the thought that maybe a good idea to add a third bullet to this, and I'm sorry, Ms. Joseph Dowers, we've kept you busy all day today. The third bullet, if my seconder is okay with this, would be to ask for a report back in the fall from staff, and based on available resources then to make recommendations for any additions that we could have then. And then this also opens up the opportunity for trustee to vote separately on this. I would ask that we would have the vote separately so that people could then weigh in on what they're comfortable, depending on how they feel about the use of POD and so on.
Thank you, Trustee Tito, because I am fully aligned.
Thank you, Trustee Lee. So, present a report in the fall on the possible addition of VPs based on available resources at the time.
Elementary VPs?
Yes.
On the possible addition of VPs based, elementary VPs based on
Available resources. And to staff, I didn't mention more specific date. The fall is reasonable? Yes, okay.
Sorry?
Fine.
2020.
So I think there's still some folks on the speakers list. Do I need a seconder for that? No, Trustee Lee is already seconding. Thank you. So I'll cede my time and it's based on in the fall. Yes, please. Does it say? Oh. So, Chair, I'll cede my time.
Okay. Oh, thank you. Trustee McLean?
Thank you, and through the chair. This is this is awkward for me because, I opened Pandora's box and, but staff has indicated, that 16 mil is the appropriate level and that represents 20% of what we have. And that, and I can respect both of those positions. So in good conscience, I can't go above the 16. That being said, I'd like to ask Associate Director Zucker if two positions, if I made an amendment changing 6 to 2, would that get us, would that max us out at the 16 million?
Through the chair, yeah, we were at 15.7 now, so the 300,000 would allow for addition of 2.
Okay, yeah, I can't go above, I can't go to 6. So the highest I can go is to 2. So I would like to offer an amendment that A be changed from 6.0 to 2.0.
Trustee McLean, can I suggest maybe we add a fourth bullet and then people can vote for whatever they support?
Sure. If
it's a reasonable thing to do, and I'm really sorry to.
No, on the level of, people have been so agreeable throughout the night, making all these, it would seem inappropriate to draw a hard line at this. I'm happy to go fourth, even fifth if someone decides that they have something else. But sure, throw it at the end and we can vote at Seriatim and people can vote as they deem appropriate. Sure, I'm good with that.
So to explain what I think we agreed on, to replicate bullet A as a separate bullet, and to change the 6 to a 2. Yes?
And I'm just asking out loud, I'm good with that, but would it have to say that it assumes that A didn't can't do it twice kind of thing? We can't.
No, you can't. Okay, so then do your separate motion, we'll vote on it, and then we'll vote on the rest, but your motion then is on.
Well, I'm good with
your
going
amendment.
after. I like the full fallback position that if we don't find, because,
If it doesn't pass, you can move yours.
can we do that? If it,
Can we do that? Yeah?
Yeah,
Okay,
it's a different
okay,
motion.
okay.
okay, that's even better.
Never
So
mind
if this
then.
doesn't pass, then I would be happy to support your motion, okay?
Okay, so
So add Seriatim.
my head's spinning. Okay, we're still on that.
A and B together, and then C. It's the same thought.
It's the same thing.
Wasn't it a meeting?
Vote is open. Madam Chair, the vote is open on parts A and B.
It's not open for me on eScribe.
It was for me.
It was
Okay.
for me.
Yeah, okay, so
Okay. So are we voting at Seriatim? Are we voting on A and B
A
first, or what's happening?
we're, we're voting for A and B together? And then C? Yes, okay.
Trustee Axe,
So the first one, okay.
Okay, Trustee Lee's against. Thank you.
Trustee Patel,
Trustee Patel, Trustee Shan?
I'm against.
Trustee Shan in favor.
That was defeated.
Say that's defeated. So now we have a C. Okay.
Shan in favor.
Lee is in
Patel against.
Trustee Lee, Madam Chair,
Trustee Lee is in favor.
and Trustee Shan.
Trustee Shan? Sorry, that didn't come through.
Shan in favor.
Thank you. And that carries. Okay. Dare I ask, are there any more speakers or motions? Oh, Trustee McLean.
I'd like to move that it's not in front of me anymore, but we had two positions, two VP positions, and use the same motion that we just looked at. Ms. Joseph Dowers with 2 instead of 6, which like I'm prepared to take our chances with 16 mil, the max that staff has identified, and take our chances with the ministry.
Who's the second?
Trustee Dovitis can second.
I think the cost would be 3.
Should it say remaining or just reinstate?
Just say 2.
Move remaining.
Just say 2, and then the cost estimate changes as well.
Remove,
It's
remaining.
280,000?
Two elementary positions.
Okay. Trustee Lee?
Leave that on.
Yeah, thank you, Madam Chair. I honestly, I really appreciate Trustee Earhart and Trustee McLean's motions. I hear the need and I understand that we absolutely need more VPs. The reason why I'm going to vote against this one as well is just because I'm having a bit of a challenge, just diverting more resources to VPs when we already have 20 more VPs or so, I think more than we had back in 2019. And I'm saying this because, I'm also hearing from parents every day of all the other needs that our kids have, but we don't have the resources to satisfy. We spend a lot of time talking about special education. Now, I didn't move a motion that based, funding of special education on proceeds of distribution just because as an accountant, I fundamentally have challenges initiating something to cover for a recurring operating cost using one-time funds. But I understand why Trustee McLean moved his motion. But so I think the responsible thing, at least that I can align myself to, is to wait until we get a better picture of what our financial situations look like in the fall to make this call. So I really appreciate once again Trustee McLean and Earhart's motion, but I'm going to vote no again on this one.
Trustee Laskin?
Thank you, Madam Chair. There's no funding source for this motion. It's not in order.
Oh, sorry. We need the same B as before. We need the same B from the previous motion, right?
Yes,
That it's POD?
yes, please.
And as staff do that, I know that people will fall off their chairs because I am usually a huge supporter of this, but I can't fund VPs through POD. It feels just wrong, and I won't support it. Thank you.
I don't see any more speakers, so could we open the vote?
Trustee Patel against.
Shan in favor.
Lee is against.
And that's defeated. And
I'm out.
do we have any more speakers or motions before I call for adjournment? Seeing no hands, may I have a motion to adjourn? Trustee Laskin, Trustee Gudvides. Anyone against? Thank you very much.
Thanks, everybody.
Have
Good night.
a good evening.
Good night. Good night, everyone.
So I'm going to go over to Jim.